We'll call the meeting of the Minot City Council to order for today, Monday, March 4th, 2019. I would ask once again if you have any electronic devices to put them on silent or vibrate or turn them off so we can keep the disruptions to a minimum, please. Roll call.
Dancer.
Here.
Olson. Here. Pittner.
Here.
Quadrigula.
Here.
Straight.
Here.
Wolski.
Here.
Sitma.
Here. Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Number 3 on our agenda this evening is personal appearances. This is the opportunity for anyone in the audience to come and speak on any item that is not part of our regular agenda. So if you're here to speak about something that you didn't see show up online or on the agenda that you picked up when you came in, this is your opportunity to come to the podium and talk about whatever you would like. Seeing none, we will move on. For number 4, a public hearing.
A public hearing to consider rezoning L. Johnson subdivision, Lot 1, from C2 General Commercial to R1 Single Family Residential. It's Planning Commission Agenda Item Number 3.
All right, for this public hearing, this is an opportunity for anyone to come and speak on the item that was just described, number 4 on your agenda. For or against the item? Last opportunity. If not, I would look to the council for a motion. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I move we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Motion by Alderman Janser.
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion. Please call the roll.
Janser.
Yes.
Olson. Yes. Pittner.
Yes.
Quadrigula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. Number 5, public hearing.
A public hearing to consider rezoning of Oak Park Place, 2nd Edition, Lot 1, from R4 Planned Residence to R2 Two-Family Residential. It's Planning Commission Agenda Item Number 5.
All right. Once again, an opportunity for anyone to speak for or against this item on the agenda for the public hearing for Oak Park Place. I myself actually have a question for our principal planner, Mr. Lang. Just very briefly.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Good evening, Mr. Lang. Thank you for coming up for a question here. My question actually was regarding the base flood elevation. Watching the Planning Commission on Monday, there was quite a bit of talk. I really didn't catch anything about the base flood elevation in terms of new construction down in our flood valley. I was just curious, has this been under consideration by the individual that is looking to build new?
I guess that it didn't come up, but they would have to comply with our floodplain regulations in order to get a building permit and be at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation that's established by a surveyor.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Lang. And I'm done asking questions unless anybody else does. And that was just a reminder to the general public itself regarding the base flood elevation for new construction or any significant improvements. Anyone else in favor or against? If not, I would entertain a motion by Alderman Pittner.
Mayor, I move that we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Motion by Alderman Pittner.
Second.
Second by Alderman Straight. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Pittner.
Yes.
Quadrigula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Olson. Yes.
Motion is approved. Number 6, another public hearing.
A public hearing to consider rezoning of Section 34, Township 155 North, Range 82 West, Outlot 20, from MH Manufactured Home to RA Agricultural Residential. It's Planning Commission Item Number 7.
Once again, an opportunity for anyone to speak for or against the item for a public hearing. Last chance. I would entertain a motion from the council. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I move we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Motion by Alderman Janser,
Second.
second by Alderman Pittner. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion on the motion. Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. Number 7, another public hearing.
Public hearing to consider a request to rezone Lot 1, Block 2, Overlook Park Addition from R1 Single Family Residential to P Public. It's Planning Commission item number 9.
Once again, public hearing, an opportunity for anyone in the audience to speak for or against the item that is before us, agenda item number 7. Seeing none. Alderman Pittner.
Mayor, I move that we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Pittner, second by Alderman Janser. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion on the motion. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Number 8, another public hearing.
A public hearing to consider rezoning Prairie Green Second Edition, Lot 6, Block 22, less portion for highway, parcels 6 through 3, from C4 Planned Commercial to C2 General Commercial. It's Planning Commission item number 11.
Once again, an opportunity for anyone to speak for or against the item on the public hearing, item number 8 on our agenda. Seeing none. Alderman Pittner.
I'll move that we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Pittner, second by Alderman Straight. Discussion from the council on the motion. Alderman Wolski.
Mr. Mayor, yeah, I have a question for Mr. Lang on this one. Lance, based on my recollection from the planning agenda, most of this area around the mall seems to be zoned C4, which is a defunct zone, but we're still going to a C2 here. It's sort of an isolated island of C2. Does that bring up any concerns in terms of spot zoning, or is that this would just be sort of the way that entire area is going to be tracking towards C2 in the future?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, I believe C4, the planned commercial district, as you mentioned, is a defunct district, and the direction that we have in the ordinance is to treat that basically as a C2 property. So this is an opportunity for one parcel to make that change. The applicant had to come in for a conditional use permit anyway, so adding the rezoning was kind of just an added item. It would be difficult to go in and zone the whole mall C2, for instance, but as we work with developers around town in these defunct zones, we try to encourage them to rezone them. And there is other C2 in the area. The mall is mostly C4, but across the highway, like where CVS, for example, that area is C2. So the predominant commercial zoning district in the city is C2. There is some C4 around. We're trying to kind of convert that over. So okay. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Any further discussion or questions? Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Number 9, public hearing.
A public hearing to consider rezoning of Southwest Quarter and Northeast Quarter, Section 33-155-83 from AG Agricultural District to P Public. It's Planning Commission item number 12.
This again is a public hearing for item number 9 on our agenda. Again, this was Planning Commission item number 12 from last Monday. Anyone in the audience to speak for or against the item? This is your opportunity. Anyone to speak on item number 9? If not, I would entertain a motion. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I move we close the public hearing and approve this item.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Olson. Discussion from the council. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. That takes us to number 10, report from the mayor. And I actually did have an opportunity this afternoon to actually try to put some things down on the screen so we can go through these fairly quickly. Taking a look at the last month's activities, on February 5th, I had the opportunity to sit down with the WOWOP Group, the women-owned, women-operated business, for lunch. Also had an opportunity, if anybody hasn't seen the performance, February 13th with Carside Karaoke for Giving Hearts Day. It is worth a laugh. On February 13th as well, home acquisition for some of our acquisitions for flood control at Minot Title and Guarantee. A lunch presentation for the Magic City Apartment Renters Association on the 14th and 15th was meeting with the Minot Park leadership on the transition plan. Looking at the next couple, February 20th, lunch meeting with U.S. Senator Kevin Cramer and U.S. Representative Kelly Armstrong at Minot Air Force Base on the 20th. Also on the 20th, MADC's annual meeting at the Grand Hotel. On the 21st, we had a meeting with the Park and Rec merger group. The 21st spoke at the International Mother's Language Day at Minot State University. I believe I saw Alderman Wolski there as well. And then on the 22nd, spoke at the North Dakota State Fire School in the morning. On the 22nd, IEDC Steering Committee spoke at the Burdick Job Corps graduation ceremony later that afternoon. Master of Ceremonies for the Delta Waterfall Banquet in Minot later that evening. On the 23rd, then attended the Champagne and Ice Gala benefiting the Northern Plains Children's Advocacy Center. Moving on to the 25th, I had an interview by KX regarding the gathering space, also another interview by KMOT on the 27th. And finally participated at the launch of a new package rideshare delivery system called Package in Minot, where I had an opportunity to deliver a package down to Bismarck Mayor Steve Bakken as part of that launch. On the first, then, we spent the day at the Capitol, myself with the city manager, who will talk more about that here in a moment, as well as Alderman Janser, attending the League of Cities Day, testifying in opposition to House Bill 1471 regarding the state regulation of permit fees in the ET areas, and then also attended the afternoon session with State Senate with Senator Karen Krebsbach, and this morning attended the IEDC Steering Committee at City Hall. That is just the list without getting into all of the personal meetings, contacts, emails, and phone calls throughout the last month. I do not have any appointments today, and that is completion of my report unless any of the aldermen have any questions for me. If not, I would turn over to our city manager for a city manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, it's my pleasure to bring to you the March City Manager Report, summarizing all the activities for the month of February. We'll just jump right in and talk about important dates as we usually do. It's a little bit of a light month going into March, so not too much to put on your docket yet, but the Legislative Forum, which will occur on March 9th, a continuation of the Chamber's Legislative Forums, will be occurring at 9:30 at the State Fair Center. The March for Meals on Wheels will be 11:30 at the Parker Building on March 12th. A really great opportunity if you haven't taken one yet to get involved in that program. Minot Commission of Aging does a great job with that. March 18th, the City Council meeting next will be held at 5:30 in Chambers here. The 23rd will be the next Legislative Forum at 9:30, again at the State Fair Center. 25th, we'll have two meetings, the library merger meeting at the Minot Public Library at 1 o'clock, and then the Planning Commission will be held at 6:30 in Chambers here. On the 26th and 27th, it's the North Dakota League of Cities March Madness. It's a training for elected and appointed officials and staffers to be held all day on each day in Bismarck. And then finally, April 1st, we're back at it again with another City Council meeting at 5:30 in Council Chambers. So let's talk about the legislative process and We've reached a milestone in the legislative process. It's called crossover. It happened on February 22nd, and that's where all the bills that start in one side of the chamber switch sides to the other chamber and go through the same hearing process. Just to give you a sense of the activity that's gone on this year or this legislative session, it's been quite busy. We almost set a record for the number of bills that were introduced. There were a total of 963 filings. Of those, 546 were bills on the House side, 361 were bills on the Senate side, and then of course there were several resolutions on each side as well. So we've been tracking quite a bit of these. In fact, I'll get to the specific tracking of the bills that we have had interest in and kind of their status to a certain degree. As of crossover, 269 Senate bills will make it over to the House side, and 351 House bills will make it over to the Senate side. Did I say that right? Senate to the House, House to the Senate. The 80th day has been pushed out from April 26th to May 2nd. So we do have a little bit of it's not an extension because it's still an 80-day period, but it has been pushed out because they didn't gavel in all of the days we expected them to. There were 5 tax cap bills, all failed, so they will not be crossing over. The Senate Bill 2166 was voted down just recently. That would have quadrupled the city's tort liability from $1 million to $4 million, and not just this city's, but every political subdivisions. And it would have likely doubled the insurance premiums that the city pays for liability insurance. Just so you know, we pay north of $500,000 in insurance liability coverage. So that would have doubled as well, likely. House Bill 1066 gets a Senate hearing tomorrow. This is the Prairie Dog Bill. And so far, we think it's in good shape. Again, keep in mind, this is where our Hub City funding formula is located. So we tend to, we hope that will benefit as well as we have been instructed we will, if that passes. And then Senate Bill 2020 gets a House hearing this Thursday, and the mayor and I will be going down along with some staff and members of the Source River Joint Board. That is the appropriation bill for the State Water Commission. And of course, as you know, what is of still great concern for us is the money that has been allocated to the Mouse River Enhanced Flood Protection Plan is not enough for us to keep the momentum that we had been counting on. So we'll want to speak to that on Thursday. The bills that we've been monitoring since the start of the session number 105. That means we've had to somehow either read and study and evaluate, testify on, either for or against, or watch, or be involved in amendments, or all of that sort of stuff. This is tremendous work. I can't stress how much time goes into the legislative session, but I can't stress enough how important that work is for our community and for communities all around the state. So it's extremely valuable time. It's just pretty intense. Of these bills, 42 that we've been monitoring have been voted down, and therefore we don't have to monitor them any longer after the crossover. The remaining bills, 63 or so, we are going to have to continue to monitor, and we've already started testifying on them in the other chamber. So still a lot of work to do. Now we have to look forward to conference committees. We have to look forward to amendments and other sorts of deviations from the original intended language and those sorts of things. So still a large lift ahead of us. You should just be aware that that is continuing behind the scenes. Of the bills that I just mentioned, we have 8 that we're actively supporting, 8 that we're actively opposed to, and then 48 that we're watching, which may or may not be something that we need to get a little bit more active in, either opposing or supporting. So I put these up. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I put them up for the public and for your benefit. And of course, this presentation will be memorialized on the website. So anyone who wants to know the city's position or what we're doing or that sort of stuff can see all these bill numbers, and it's easy to track them at the North Dakota legislative website. Additionally, all of our testimony, I think most of our testimony, I should say, has been put into the city's website as well, and the public should have access to that as well.
Tom, in terms of how we're tracking these bills, are we using the state's legislative bill tracking system that they have sort of internal attached to the legislature? And if so, is that something that we can make public and available and shareable too, in terms of, I think there is that ability to actually share those lists and have them kind of transferred around.
Yes, Mayor Sitma, Alderman Wolski, we're using multiple legislative trackers. We have some for the water organizations. We have some for North Dakota League of Cities, the Attorneys Association. There are a number of different associations, and the reason we do that is because some bills aren't a concern for one association or another association, so we're kind of tracking multiples. It would be very unwieldy for us to try to get all of that information and continue to track that. Anyone who's interested can go to the same associations. Like the North Dakota League of Cities has their bill tracker online, for example. I really would rather not have to administer theirs with others and ours and all of that. Please, that would be enormous work for us as well. But they are out there, and anyone who's interested, we can help guide people to them if they have specific questions. That would be absolutely appropriate, but it's a lot. Hopefully that's answered your question. All right, continuing on, we'll move to the International Economic Development Council report in progress. As you know, the stakeholders group met, not too long ago, maybe 6 weeks or so ago. And in those meetings, we had several of those meetings, we were able to get reports from technical teams, and that information has been synthesized now into a fairly easy to read one-page gap document, essentially which characterizes all of the gaps from all of the different technical teams and puts it into one concise document. That document has become sort of the work plan for the steering committee, which has now met twice. And the steering committee is an 8-member team right now, which is composed of myself, the mayor, Mr. Tim Mahalik, the executive directors of Visit Minot, MADC, the Chamber, and then we have the president of the Downtown Business and Professionals Association. It feels like I'm missing one more person.
Source Basin.
Source Basin, the executive director for the Source Basin Planning Council. So that is the group. We've had 2 meetings, and we've gone through this document that I just referenced, and have agreed that that document is an accurate summary of all of the gaps. We've been working to identify which organizations may provide some services or might be interested in providing more services to help close those gaps. We've gone through 3 of the 6 or 7 organizations right now, so that work will continue. We're going to identify the kinds of resources that are needed to fill the gaps and which organization is best in the best position to maybe take on those resources or to provide those resources and take on those tasks. So all of that is kind of continuing. There'll be a lot more that will come out of that group. We sort of see this as a long process, which we're trying to move through quickly. But there are a couple of recommendations that I want to bring to you that the group has made. The first one is that the stakeholder group, you might recall several weeks back, had made a recommendation that the city get more involved, and essentially that's what in economic development, and of course that's what almost every single one of the technical team reports suggested as well. There was a recommendation that was made by Mr. Mahalik at the stakeholders group meeting for the city to formally move on hiring an economic development specialist. That was discussed also at the steering committee level, and a motion was made and seconded, and it was unanimously supported at that level as well. So I will be putting together a job description. I'll be working with the HR director and other staff members to evaluate what that position might look like, what its cost might be, and bring that back for your consideration. I hope maybe at the next council meeting. A couple things about this that we're envisioning at the moment is that this would be a fairly higher level staff position that would report to the Community and Economic Development Director, who would oversee this position, and essentially be an individual that would work as a liaison between all of the economic development agencies and lead the gaps that the city ends up getting identified as appropriate to lead for itself. There was a second motion, or a recommendation, I should say, that was made by the steering committee, and that is to approve the One Brand Committee's recommendation to hire a consultant to execute their One Brand marketing and branding campaign and apply to the Magic Fund for the financing of that particular campaign. So that will be something that will move through the process, and you will also eventually be able to see and weigh in on when and if that application does get through the Magic Fund screening committee and then eventually to the City Council. So a lot of activity still going on, a lot of movement and I think momentum, which is very positive for our community on the economic development front. Next, I wanted to talk about the filling of our Community and Economic Development Director, Mr. Brian Billingsley, who is currently been the Planning and Zoning Director for the City of Caldwell, Idaho, has accepted our offer to join as our Community and Economic Development Director. He's slated to start the first week of April. He has 25 years of planning and community development experience. The town that he currently works in is about a little bit larger than our town right now, about 55,000. He does have experience with downtown revitalization. The City of Caldwell has done some amazing things over the last decade or so in helping to revitalize their community. He does have experience with river space designs. The Indian Creek corridor has also been completely redesigned and accentuated. That was very, very exciting to see as well. And he also has experience in developing and implementing gathering spaces. The City of Caldwell did do a downtown gathering space on about a 1-acre piece of property. They incorporated an ice skating rink and some other amenities as well. So some of the very similar experience that we're just in projects that we're just about to undertake ourselves. He does have Midwest roots, except for the 10 or 11 years or so that he spent in Caldwell. He spent the remainder of that in the Midwest, so he's familiar with our climate. He's familiar with sort of the Midwest culture and those sorts of things, which is all very good as well. So I think he'll be a good fit for our community, and he's very, very excited about the position as well. Okay, next I want to update you a little bit on the NDR, National Disaster Resiliency progress. A little bit on the gathering space. You know, HUD did issue our release of funds, which is great because now that sort of allows us to go full steam ahead, and we are doing just that. We've placed 8 offers to various property owners in and around the location of the gathering space. We're awaiting counter offers at this point in time. Our offers were based on the city's assessed value plus 10% or so. We do have this cost reasonableness threshold that we have to ensure that we meet with HUD. And we have to be able to justify that. So that's going to be a guide for us as we move forward. Keep in mind again, through the amendments, the waiver, we were able to receive $2.5 million for acquisition, demolition, and restoration, leaving the remainder of the $6 million, which would be about $3.5 million, for construction of all of the amenities in the site. So we're excited. We do hope that we'll be able to keep this moving. And there will be more to come, certainly, as we get offers and go through that exchange. As it relates to the City Hall project, this has been something that has been a long time in the works as well. We did, I'm proud to say, maybe relieved or happy or excited to say, we finally were able to get through the waiver process with Housing and Urban Development. And they published finally our waiver in the Federal Register, allowing us to move forward on the City Hall relocation project. This is critical, as you might know, for a number of different reasons I'll get to in just a moment. But I do want to say that the first time that the city submitted the waiver was in 2016. That was denied at that point in time. And HUD had said to the city, we don't believe that you have made adequate progress on fulfilling the needs of the vulnerable population. So go do that first and then come back to us. Well, several years later, and some significant advancements in our work, we submitted another waiver. I want to say it was a year from last November. That got stalled in the process. We had to prove a few things up, and we worked with HUD to do that. And then we resubmitted the waiver last summer, late last summer or so, and that's been working through its process. We expected to have this earlier, about December of last year, except that the government shutdown kind of got in the way of that. And so that delayed things for a couple months. But we're very excited about this. We're excited for a number of reasons, and I want to remind the community and the council, because I don't think many of you were on the city council when the city submitted its application for the City Hall project. But there were several reasons for the project. First of all, maybe first and foremost, was the threat that the flood had on this building, and in particular the emergency operations and the dispatch center. That was significant. In addition, the economic resilience part of relocating City Hall into buildings downtown and bringing a workforce downtown to help revitalize downtown was also mentioned. This building, we're jammed full with staff in this building. There's really no place to grow. You just saw, just last week, we moved the copy machine practically into the hallway to make room for a staff member in the copy room. So we have people in closets, copy rooms. I mean, it's all over the place. So what's important about this project is not just the fact that it provides space for our staff. We have no space for the council right now. None of you have offices. The mayor does not have an office. We have no meeting rooms for you. There's a number of needs that we have. And this will help that. What also this does, it'll help us from having to expand multiple buildings in the next several years. You know that the Public Works building was expanded in 2016, and they're at least 85 to 95% at capacity right now in many of the spaces that they have. So if we can take pressure off of this building and allow this building to accommodate some of the activities that's going on in the auditorium, make the auditorium more marketable since we're not occupying city spaces in there, make this building more spacious for the police station and the municipal court, and move around a number of our different operations, and at the same time centralize those operations so that we have outward-facing services available to the community in a one-stop shop location. We feel like that's a huge benefit too. What's also important about this project is that the green light for the City Hall relocation allows us to incorporate now the Center for Technical Education. You might recall the CTE project was sort of limping along there. There's just not significant money, $1.5 million when HUD came back and asked us to reduce our budgets. That $1.5 million, based on talking with the leadership of the CTE project, just wasn't enough to float that project on its own. So we have since talked with HUD and others about maybe combining the CTE with the City Hall and using the money together to create a co-located facility. And that looks like that approach may allow for the CTE to get revived and maybe get located downtown, which would also be a benefit for downtown as well. So a lot of different benefits that are being achieved here through this project. There's a lot of work that has to be done. Let me share some of that with you here too. First, let's get to the funding. There's $3.75 million that the city has received in the NDR grant for the City Hall building. There's $1.5 million that is separately received for the CTE that I just mentioned, but if we consolidate that into a co-located facility, we can use that money. However, we do have to provide a CTE. We can't just use the money for City Hall and not provide a CTE. And then lastly, there was some sales tax dollars that was set aside by the council in the tune of about $1 million. So that provides about $6.2 million of available funding. That is to finance the entire project. And I can tell you right now that will not be enough. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to be, but I can tell you that's not going to be enough. I've been involved in a couple City Hall projects in my day. I don't want to tell you what those ones went for, but they were very different circumstances and very different sizes. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to do a space analysis. We're going to have to figure out what kind of space do we need as a city, and what kind of spaces do we want located together, for example, because that'll dictate the space demands. Then we'll have to apply those space demands against a available building inventory. And so assessing the various buildings and what kind of spaces those buildings might have available for us is going to be important. And then, of course, a condition assessment of those buildings is also going to be important because we have a cost as well as a space situation that we have to manage. Eventually, we choose the property. Depending upon the property and depending upon how confident we are in the property and whatnot, we may want to make a contingent offer. HUD has very specific rules about contingent offers that we'd have to follow. An environmental review would have to take place. we'd have to make the same request as we did for the gathering space for the release of funds. That can take some time. And then finally, if we haven't made an offer, we make an offer, or we fulfill the contingent offer that we had made earlier in the process. Keep in mind, all of this activity and every dime that goes to this project or these projects has to be invoiced and spent by September 30th of 2022. All righty, a lot of work to do. A couple other things on NDR. The Housing and Urban Development has told us, and we're continuing a trend here, which is very nice. They like what we're doing. They're comfortable with what we're doing, and essentially we're not going to be the subject of an audit this year, which is great. We like to have that kind of confidence. We take that very seriously. We do not want to give any reason for needing to have an audit because of concerns. I mean, from time to time, it makes sense to have audits to make sure everybody's doing things right. But we don't want the reason for those audits to be people are concerned about what we're doing. So that's good news. We continue to hunt down zombie homes. We've purchased 5. We have 2 more that we expect to be able to purchase here, and the demolition of those is expected to occur this spring. Park South has been very successful as a project, and I wanted to bring this to your attention because there's been some conversation recently about the need or lack thereof of low to moderate income housing. Keep this in mind. 40 of the 41 units in Park South are essentially occupied right now. So that highlights the demand of the low to moderate income housing we have in our community. Another thing that's important, which plays into this, is that HUD has just adjusted the LMI limits for low income thresholds for families of 4. And I put that up here for you as well. It's kind of hard to believe, but this says a lot about our community. And these are all based on regional and local trends. But low income for a family of 4 is now considered $69,700. And I couldn't believe that. I had to check that out, but that is true. Again, keep in mind it's for a family of 4. Very low income is $43,550, extremely low $26,150. What this means is that as those thresholds continue to go up, the bracket widens for those who need low to moderate income housing. And so there will be continued demands on low to moderate income housing as those thresholds go up and more people qualify for low to moderate income housing. So just a couple things to keep in mind. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag too much here, but I do want to let you know that we will be having a separate presentation near the end of our meeting today to talk about the brand new capital improvement plan. It's new and improved. It's a 5-year capital plan. It has enormous information in it, information that I think you will find very, very helpful, particularly as we move forward over the next half decade on identifying and moving forward to completing various projects. 154 pages long, full of information. It's available on the website if people are interested in it. Our city engineer, I want to give absolute props to. Mr. Lance Meyer has done a phenomenal job leading this project for the city. He has gone above and beyond and has just knocked it out of the park. That being said, this is a document that's a work in process. We want to hear your feedback tonight, and we'll save it for when Mr. Meyer comes and gives you the presentation. But it will evolve year over year. It'll get better and better as we go along. I also want to thank the department heads because under their leadership, with their teams, they were able to develop enormous detail about the needs that they have in their departments. And each department was asked to rate and rank their projects using a uniform criteria that they developed within their department so that we knew we were going to be working on the highest priorities in that priority order. So more to come on that when Mr. Meyer talks with you, but very, very excited about this. Next, we're also excited that we'll have 50% more seats to Denver. United Airlines is adding another flight to Denver this summer. They're going to test that market and see if they can sustain that, which is good news. This is great because obviously it means the market's strong. It also means maybe with that kind of market we might see a little bit more competition, and that may drive some prices down. It may also add potentially the desirability of airlines to either come to Minot or perhaps even add more flights to different locations. So we're excited about that. Nothing's a guarantee, of course, but we want to celebrate this accomplishment. I want to thank our airport director for working hard as he continuously does to improve the airport servicing for our community. Lastly, I wanted to invite Sarah White, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, but also Sergeant Paul Burns and then the police chief up to the front here. You know, I want to just say really quickly that the police department, under the leadership of our police chief, Jason Olson, does a absolute fabulous job of making sure that at least annually his staff is formally recognized for the outstanding accomplishments and achievements that they perform each and every day in the community. And I just couldn't be happier that he's made this a priority for his staff and for our city. And that's why it's important to me to bring him up and give him an opportunity to share a few words about the accomplishments of both of his staff members and for you to formally see and recognize them as well. So, Chief.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, each year the police department recognizes an employee, a civilian employee of the year, and an officer of the year. These employees are nominated by their peers, and there's a selection committee of their peers that goes through the nominations and selects each year's winner. And for the employee of the year this year, as City Manager Berry said, it was Sarah White, who works in our investigations department. She's been with us for 3 years. And is an outstanding employee for us. She was unable to be here tonight. She works as a dance instructor, and she had a dance class that she was teaching right now, so she was unable to be here. But I do want to take a second to just recognize Sergeant Paul Burns. Paul's been with our department for 23 years. Paul has been a leader from day one. He works on our afternoon shift, has been a sergeant on the patrol force on the afternoon shift for many years. That's where he likes to be. That's where he's bid every year, and has just provided outstanding leadership for our men and women on the street, making sure that things are done right. I once told Paul, he asked me how I slept at night after I became police chief, and I told Paul I sleep better when I know that you're on the desk working down here, because I know things are getting done right, and I absolutely mean that. In addition to providing outstanding work as a sergeant, Paul's dedicated to his nation. He has been in the United States Air Force, in the Army National Guard, in the Air Force Reserve, and twice been deployed during his service. He also serves his community. He spearheads each year the Cops and Kids program each holiday season, in making sure that kids have a better holiday season. And the last couple of years, he's included the Stuff a Squad project to that, where we get all kinds of toys to go to underprivileged kids. And Paul has just been a leader in that. So I just want to recognize Paul and thank him for his service and congratulate him on this award. So thank you.
Well, with that, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I'll stand for any questions you might have.
Thank you, City Manager Berry. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tom, just one thought out of the gate here about it seems like we're going to maybe move into a new shift in some of the NDR projects. And I think we're going to have to turn around and double down the efforts back to the public of kind of re-educating everybody that this is the dollar amount, this is what it can and can't be spent for. I think we all understand that because we've been in it for a long time, but the ongoing conversations that we are wasting money about the gathering place, and I understand those sentiments. However, we're pretty locked in of what we can and can't do, and I think every time we start talking about it now, we have to maybe lead off with where the money's coming from, reiterate what we can and can't spend it on. So, and I guess I bring that up with my my favorite city clerk to my right. I came up to City Hall today and I realized that she's no longer in her office with her counterpart. She's been moved into what we formerly called the printer room. And so, Kelly, congratulations on your new office. And so if anybody thinks that it's not an issue, it's clearly been an issue. And so I look forward to those discussions moving forward. I guess one other, I forgot, so I'll yield my time, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Straight. Any further questions for City Manager Berry? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The second half of number 11 is our city attorney report.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, I submitted a written report, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for our city attorney? Thank you, Kelly. That takes us to number 12 on our agenda. Consider the report to the Planning Commission. We have addressed items number 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 12 in public hearings. We have items that are actionable in front of us for this section, number 1, number 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 13. I have been asked to pull number 10.
Mr. Mayor,
Alderman Janser.
I would move consent on the remaining items as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Pittner. And for anyone in the audience, the motion is to move consent on items number 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 13, pulling number 10 for discussion. The other items have already been approved by public hearing. If anyone wants any other items pulled, please let us know and we'll pull that for discussion. If not, it will be passed as it came to us from planning. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. That takes us to number 10, to adopt a resolution for a conditional use permit, or a CUP, to accommodate a clinic, more specifically described as a medical marijuana dispensary.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move the motion.
Second.
Motion to approve by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Wolski. Discussion or comments from the public? Alderman Wolski.
Question, I think, for Mr. Lang. Lance, this application for the conditional use permit, somewhat dependent on actions from the state that are out of our hands. In the event that this applicant isn't awarded the state license to conduct this business, does that have any impact, or what do you see the future looking like in that scenario? How does that affect this property?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, the state is in charge to a large degree on this, and the city has a fairly minor role, but part of our role is to, from a local zoning perspective, figure out where dispensaries can and can't go, and that was done back in 2016 when the code was amended to allow them in commercial and industrial districts in the city with a conditional use permit. And this applicant that's on the agenda tonight is the first applicant to apply. I understand that the state deadline was the 26th, which was, I think, like last Tuesday. And talking to some of the other applicants and reading up on the material on the internet from the state, they can provide kind of a provisional approval for applicants to move forward in their process without having the conditional use permit necessarily a done deal with the city. So there are other applicants. I believe I read in the paper there were 4 in the Minot area. So I'm expecting to hear from 3 more as we continue to work through this, and the ones here tonight. And then it's a selective process, or a competitive process. So the state would decide which out of those, for example, 4 would move on to the final nod from the state, and then that would be the one that would ultimately have the conditional use permit. Because it's a competitive process, there may be companies that apply even for the same location, but only one will prevail at the end with the state. And so those conditional use permits that may be kind of provisionally approved, so to speak, because if they ultimately aren't approved by the state, then they will have no need for the permit or to.
And I think, Lance, that kind of gets to the root of my question, which is, does this conditional use permit, does that go with the property, or does that go with the specific applicant? Or the owner, the ownership group? I'm trying to get a sense of what would happen in the event that this applicant wasn't awarded the license. We have a property that has a conditional use permit, but I'm not sure that it would be used for that use. It might not. So, tell me about the details, or maybe it's a question for our city attorney. I'm not sure in terms of the situation surrounding a conditional use permit.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Walsky, the conditional use permit is for the company that applied for it, but they can amend the conditional use permit and it goes through the same process. So it would come back to the Planning Commission and the City Council, because they may have different ideas for how they intend to use it. I know there was information presented by this applicant, so
Okay.
we would see it again with an amendment to that conditional use permit.
If there were a transfer of ownership or a different applicant using it.
If it were a different applicant, I would think that,
Okay.
yep.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Wolski, it's my understanding in speaking with the applicants, their intent is to buy this property, at least the one tonight and another one I talked to. So if they were selected by the state, got the conditional use permit from the city, they would purchase the property. So they would be the owner, operator, and that would be the location for that permit. So as we work through that process with the state, it's kind of dependent on who they choose. And as we have these conditional use permits come in, we're going to take them one by one, and then there'll be one selected at the end of the process.
Okay.
Any further questions, Alderman Straight?
Mr. Mayor, do you have a timeline of what you know of when the state is ultimately going to decide this matter? I guess that's my first question, then I have a follow-up for Mr. Lang.
I'm not aware of what that timeline is,
Okay.
but that's something we can certainly look into, unless our city attorney happens to know that off of hand when their deadline is. Alderman Straight.
Thanks for the continuation, sir. Mr. Lane, is the first group here just basically been the guinea pig, and the final three could just come before you and say, hey, we'd like to apply for a conditional use permit in the same spot that the previous applicant did?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question, Mr.
I guess I'm asking, the first group that's applied tonight, couldn't the remaining three groups just come forward and say, the pathway's been cleared, we'd like to apply for the same spot?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Straight, the city attorney and I did discuss that. Because it's important that the conditional use permit be tailored to the owner as well as the site. I think they all have that particular accountability for each owner and the site. Only one will prevail in the end, but we did discuss, well, the first one came through, they got a conditional use permit, so anybody else that comes along can just piggyback on that. And I would say that the commission and council would have a hard time to turn one down, now that the precedent's been set, but it's not like they can just say, well, there was already a permit, so we don't have to go through the process. We know one's been issued. You understand what I'm saying?
Yep. Thank you, sir.
And if I may, just following up in the last couple of days of news cycle, the onerous, I think, task that these companies are going to have to overcome, even the medicinal marijuana dispensary in Fargo was delayed opening a couple of days because they still had not reached their thresholds of getting the permits that were not only from the city but from the state and getting that clearance. So it is quite substantial. It's not just to the building, as Mr. Lang said, but to the applicant as well.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor, and just so the public knows, that this is for medicinal marijuana, so it's only people that have a condition that qualifies, and they have to be approved by a doctor and get a special card to go in and access it. So any fears about teenagers or people that go there to try to get marijuana, it's a highly controlled operation by the state, and the state's in charge of all the licensing, operations, continuing education, safety, any violations, or the state takes care of all that. Really, all the city's involved in trying to work with the applicants to select a proper location for this conditional use permit.
Any further questions for our principal planner? Thank you, Mr. Lang.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Further discussion from the council, Alderman Walsky.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. I'm going to support this item tonight. I don't, and I think I see myself very likely supporting any other applicants that come forward, provided they're within the regulations that have been set forth by the state, which are fairly significant. And I think the plausible reality here, which is we have an applicant for this conditional use permit that wants to be able to share with the state that they're, good faith working towards being able to deliver this service into the community when the time comes, and I think there might be a hope that they would perhaps gain some advantage in the applicant or the application process. I think that's all well and good. I don't have a problem with that. I'm going to support this, but I just also wanted to say that I think I'm likely inclined to support most of these applications as they come forward, just because I think these types of operations are not going to be a detriment to the community, and I don't think they're gonna, there's some alarmism attached to this, and I just don't think it's reasonable, so.
Further discussion from the council or from the audience? Any comments from the public? We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padrigula.
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. That takes us to number 13 on our agenda. This is the consent items, and I have been asked to pull 13.6 and 13.9. Other items wish to be pulled from our consent agenda. And for the public, once again, this is all remaining items except for 13.6 and 13.9 would be looked past with consent as recommended by staff.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move consent on the remaining items.
Second.
Alderman Janser with motion to approve, second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner, Padrigula.
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. 13.6 is the deposit placement agreement. A change to the North Dakota Century Code now allows municipalities to use deposit placement services for deposits and certificates of deposit. Chapter 2104 of the North Dakota Century Code deals with the depositories of public funds. Section 210409 requires the financial institutions to pledge securities in the amount of 110% for any public corporation funds exceeding the FDIC maximum of $250,000. Staff recommends approval of the deposit placement agreement with First Western Bank.
Move approval.
We'll take a motion and then we'll open it up for comment.
Move approval.
Motion to approve by Alderman Olson,
Second.
second by Alderman Straight.
Thank you.
Please.
So, so we all know that cash sweeps.
Could you please state your name and address for the record as well?
Yes,
And then
so
pull the
it's,
microphone down just a little bit.
Yeah, because I'm super tall. So my name is Tori Maris Lindeman. So I came here for two topics. This is one of them. So cash sweeps are a way that we can help, get rid of debt. It was a way that people used to get around government regulations to do so. Now, how do we decide that we're going to be doing it with First Western Bank? Did we explore other banks to see what they would offer us, or did we just take that specific bank just like that? That's the question I have for this item.
For that, I'm going to ask our finance director to step forward here. Good
Mr.
evening,
Mayor,
Mr. Lakefield.
members of the council, this is an account that is already in place. We have several accounts at First Western Bank. One of them is our cash sweep account, where our daily transactions go in and out of this account. Because of the amount of money that is in that account exceeds the FDIC limit of $250,000, First Western Bank is required to either pledge securities or come up with another mechanism that, in essence, guarantees those funds that are held in excess of $250,000. A recent change, I believe it was in the last legislative session, the state of North Dakota approved these types of programs instead or in replacement of pledging securities. First Western Bank had proposed going to this type of service instead of the pledging of securities. In exchange, the city gets a little bit better rate of return on the funds that are held at the bank. So this is just another mechanism of guaranteeing the funds that are already held at First Western Bank. And my assumption would be that we will see more of these with the other banking institutions that we have funds at in the future.
Which does include other banking institutions within Minot. Mr. Lakefield, correct?
That is correct. And essentially, in a nutshell, what this service does is it farms out deposits to other banking institutions. The city can provide a list of institutions that we don't want funds going to avoid exceeding the $250,000 cap. So it's just a service that bundles these deposits out to other banking institutions so we can stay underneath the $250,000 limit.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. Ms. Lindeman, does that answer your question? Any questions for Mr. Lakefield while he is at the podium?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Alderman Walski.
Mr. Lakefield, in exchange for this, we get a better rate of return. What's the margin between what we're getting right now and what we're going to be getting if we sign this agreement with First Western?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Wolski, that is a little bit variable. I believe the assumption is that we will be about 25 to 50 basis points. But again, that is just depending on the rate of return they can get to farm these out to other institutions as well.
Okay. One follow-up here, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Alderman Walski.
Dave, I'm going to be asking something here, which you probably, if you don't have the answer, that's fine. But what would precipitate this particular policy change? You know, this is a kind of a long-standing practice in terms of the pledged assets, the last legislative session. You know, was this something municipalities were seeking? Was this the banking industry seeking this? Do you have any sense of where this may have came from in terms of a new financial instrument?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, this particular case did originate from First Western Bank with some discussions that we had with them. I think that this is going to be the direction that most banking institutions are going to go moving forward with public funds. The maintaining the pledge of securities is a little bit cumbersome for them. This makes that process more streamlined, and hence the increased rate of return on the deposits.
Alderman Walski.
I don't have any further questions, Mr. Lakefield. I appreciate that. If we've reached a point, I'd be happy to share some comments, but I don't know if anybody else has any questions.
Alderman Padragula.
Not much into Dave.
Mr. Lakefield, one last question. I apologize.
I'm not much into the intricacies of banking and money and stuff like that, but my understanding is that if you get a higher rate of return, there's also a higher rate of risk or higher risk. Could you address that issue?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Padragula, generally when you're speaking about investments, that is true. However, where we're gaining the higher rate of return here is in the efficiencies of investing that money. Currently, under the situation that we have in place today, the banking institution has to manage those deposits, and it has to be held in 110% of what we actually have to make sure that that is covered. So these companies have figured out a way to do that efficiently and pass those cost savings on, and that's where we make up the difference in the rate of return.
Thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Lakefield? Alderman Walski.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I appreciate Mr. Lakefield's perspective on this. What I see happening here, and this stuff is not easy to sort out, and my analysis here could very easily be wrong, but we're exchanging, in a sense, a local pledge and a local guarantee of these dollars, and it is essentially being deferred to the federal government through the FDIC program. And so because these $250,000 thresholds are being spread out over multiple institutions instead of being held in one, the federal government becomes the guarantor on these dollars as they get spread out over. And I guess the question becomes, and I don't need, sometimes you don't even want to introduce these questions of doubt, but do we have more faith in the federal government than we do in our local banking institutions? And in a sense, that is sort of what's here. I'm going to trust the recommendations of our staff on this to have, sort of vetted this one out. But I have some concerns over the larger global policy that's taking place here, and I'm not entirely sure that it's a good thing.
Further discussion? Further discussion? We have a motion and a second to approve. Please call the roll.
Olson? Yes. Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to number 13.9, the City Hall retaining wall engineering selection 4398, a grounded rock retaining wall system currently in place to retain the soil for City Hall complex. The existing damage is due to cracking and subsequent movement from the wall facing and not global slope movement. Additionally, wall damage is likely to occur in the future if a change is not made. The 2016 City Hall complex retaining wall provided preliminary engineering and estimate costs for the necessary repairs and reconstruction. This project will include retaining wall number 1 and number 2. Now is the time to start the necessary design and engineering for this project. Staff has programmed $1.4 million in the capital improvement plan for 2019 to start the work if council approves the engineering consulting contract. There are 3 different recommended council authorizations there. I would entertain a motion.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Olson.
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, we had I think a fairly in-depth conversation here at council a couple months ago on this. I still have some concerns about this project. I think the estimate that we are contemplating here has been somewhat limited in terms of the scope of what was evaluated on the front end. We do not presently have a wall in these locations. We have a slope with a facing, and that facing has been stable for essentially the last 70 years. So I think the construction or the drafting of this project in its original scope was too limiting. So I would offer an amendment that simply provides a little bit of extra direction for Mr. Meyer as he develops the scope of this to, as he's working with our consultant, make the first course of action to bring us cost estimates on 3 other alternatives that do not include a wall. And so I would offer that as an amendment to advise our city engineer to negotiate with our consultant such that the first part of work in the scope is to evaluate the cost of alternatives to replacing the facing with a wall.
We have a motion by Alderman Walski for an amendment.
I'll second it so we can talk about it.
Second by Alderman Padrugula. Discussion on the amendment to the motion. Discussion on the amended motion. Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I guess just to throw out an initial thought, maybe it's just because of the optics of the evening and how it's unfolded, but yeah, we talked about this a couple months ago, and I'm certainly not in favor of spending the money. I recognize the discussion that we've had about the wall, but I'm also more interested in, let's take a look at maybe what those cost estimates might be if the amendment passes. Maybe we should also have a conversation about directing the $1.4 million or sorry for the clarification.
1.4.
1.4 to, we just heard from our city manager the discussion of moving City Hall. I recognize that this building is going to be used by our police force, and I'm not, looking to, limit or negate the impacts of the wall on the longevity of this building. But I think it's also moved into the larger conversation of spending the amount of money for this particular purpose as City Hall, when the larger conversation for me is about trying to spend the money wisely on what is maybe the future of this building. Clearly, we're going to use this chamber for these discussions moving forward, regardless if City Hall is here or not. So I guess I want to enter it into the larger context of what we're doing to spend money efficiently, forward-thinking, and just kind of have that on the table as well, because it's in the back of my mind, as I'm sure it is in all of yours.
Further discussion on the amendment. Alderman Olson.
Yes, I was fortunate enough to sit on the selection committee, and so did hear some presentations from different engineering groups. The engineering group that was chosen did look at different options, and I'm not going to speak engineering language. I'll let our city engineer come up and describe those options, but the option that they chose for us is what is before us. They believed that that was the most efficient use and the most long-lasting option that we could have.
Alderman Padrugula, you had your hand a moment ago.
I wanted maybe to ask a question of him when he's done.
Mr. City Engineer, Lance.
I speak engineering. So, Mr. Mayor and members of council, we can study we can study lots of things. And of course, there's a cost to all that. We have to keep that in mind. But at the same time, I think it really gets down to what is our long-term expectation. You know, we can replace what we have there with another grouted riprap wall. Will we get 60-some years out of it? I don't know. Personally, I think we got lucky with what we have. We see these type of walls starting to fail all over Minot. They're all built about the same time or maybe a little bit earlier. We've had some that were constructed later than this one that have failed multiple times. So it depends on a lot of things. It depends on groundwater. It depends on soil conditions. It depends on many, many factors that are hard to quantify. The other thing that I think we should all keep in mind is regardless of whether our city hall functions leave this building, I highly doubt we'll be entirely vacating this building. And the auditorium complex right above here will be around for many, many decades. So we need additional parking, whether we have additional police forces here or overflows for tournaments. I mean, I think we've all parked at different places around the campus during certain events that are hosted at both of these facilities. So it's not just replacing what we have with something that's similar or looking at different wall types. It's maybe a larger discussion as to what is the overall benefit for the facility that we want to gain from this. I will tell you with an absolute fact that a retaining wall system will outlast another grouted riprap solution. So we could get 40, 50 years out of a repeat, or we could get less, but at some point we'd have to replace that system again.
Thank you, Lance. Alderman Pontargula.
My question, Lance, would be if we adopted Josh's amendment, would that impose any costs, additional costs, significant additional costs on what's being proposed for the engineering contract? And second, my recollection from last discussion was that we probably needed to move on this fairly quickly to take advantage of the construction season. So would that, besides costing any extra money, would that delay the project significantly if we step back a little bit further?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pontargula, it would add some delay. How much? It kind of depends on what the scope would be for these additional solutions. I mean, you kind of have what you have. You have a wall option, you have a do-nothing option, you have a remove and replace what you have. If you want to get into some maybe some other non-conventional type of options, that's going to take some additional testing and analysis and time to look through some of those things. Of course, then we're going to have to weigh that with what the impacts to other facilities are. I know Alderman Wolski at the last meeting or a month or two ago had brought up the idea, well, what if we just slope the hillsides back to something that we could plant grass on or something to that effect. And you could do that. However, you're going to lose a lot of real estate. 3rd Avenue up top would disappear to make a slope like that. You would have probably the elimination of the fire lane right next to the auditorium building. We'd be excavating pretty close to that foundation at that point, which we'd have to do some analysis to see if we would have any sliding movements with that. So all of these things can be looked at, certainly, and that's what we do as engineers, but there is a cost to that and there is a time component.
Following up on what Lisa said, is your understanding as an engineer that the firm has done a preliminary analysis, like she said, in terms of this really being the best option? So they've already done some of that.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pontargula, I think, because we have our meetings posted online, they took a look at what the conversation was last time and they dug into what was suggested before. And the option is that, yeah, I mean, you could look at it and see if it's still feasible to replace what we have, but likely what you're going to find is a product that is going to be inferior to a retaining wall system, and there's going to be some trade-offs with that we'll have to take a look at.
But engineer to engineer, layperson to engineer is a different conversation. From an engineering standpoint, have they done a preliminary look at these other options?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pontargula, I'd say no. I think they briefly looked at some additional options, but they still stand behind their recommendation that a wall would be the best solution for us.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions for Mr. Meyer? Alderman Wolski.
Just a clarification here. I think Lance has read a little more into my proposed amendment than is actually here. So the grout riprap solution, it is what we have now, but it may not be the only alternative. I think there are several ideas that I think could be contemplated and should be explored, which is, but it would start with, I guess, a question here, Lance, regarding the testing and the geological surveys that were done and some borings around. Those particular borings were adequate for delivering us preliminary engineering and estimates attached to a full excavation and a wall. Would those same borings and those same studies not be adequate for doing what is, likely a much less invasive work around this area? I mean, if we're not dramatically restructuring the slope, is that not preliminary data we've gathered not suitable to gather some estimates?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, I think on a first blush look at some other options, I think we'd have probably what we need. There's some other factors that may play into if we replace that grouted riprap system is there something that we should do to try to prolong the design life of that? We may need some other testing in that regard. I don't know what that would be at this time. We'd have to consult the geotechnical engineers to know for sure, but now when we talked to our consultant here that we're proposing, they said they do have enough information to design the walls that they recommended within the original study.
So the presumption should be that if they have enough to do the design of the walls, they would have enough to do an estimate that requires less invasion into the site.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, I would agree that there may not be a need for additional geotechnical drillings and those sort of things. As far as evaluating other systems, I think it kind of depends on the direction we want to go and maybe the technology that could be used.
Okay. Lance, in terms of getting to a slope with a grade that is easily acceptable for vegetation, what do we have to get to? What is sort of the, because again, there are a number of slopes around town that I look at and I go, boy, those are as steep as, or maybe even steeper than what we're contemplating here, and they're growing grass and they've been stable and they've got roads right above them. So what is your comfort level in terms of the gradient to be able to accommodate a vegetation or some other type of restraining surface?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Wolski, in our world, 4-to-1 slopes are we feel pretty comfortable with those. You can go down to 3-to-1 slopes. As far as the maintenance goes, anything less than that, it's basically you can't maintain them unless you would try to do that by hand with a weed whip or something like that. If you're going with a grass slope. However, the steeper that you make a slope, because of the velocity water that comes over the top of it, even with rainwater that hits the face, you increase the potential for erosion. So you have to be mindful of those things, and the maintenance, of course, will increase because once those rills start, if you don't get to them right away, you could lose that slope.
Alderman Wolski.
Mr. Meyer, so Lance, I appreciate you calling attention to the maintenance issue. A number of these slopes that I've observed around town are so steep that they are not maintained. They're essentially kept in native grasses or longer ditch grass or something like that. And maybe that isn't in perfect compliance with the city's maintenance requirements and ordinances. So again, and we've brought this up at I think past meetings. Maybe that's a particular ordinance that needs an adjustment. But if you were to deliver a vegetative surface onto that slope that did not require maintenance, that simply was allowed to, a native grass or a wildflower or something, so you didn't ever have to put a mower on it. Does that change the equation in which, we're concerned about 3-to-1 or anything else like that?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Wolski, you know, you still have to get that grass established, which is always the hardest part. On any project that we do, it could be a $20 million downtown reconstruction project. The only complaints you'll ever get is about grass and restoration. So in this case, that would be my primary concern. You know, those long grasses are great, but they're not maintenance free. One concern that we're going to have, and I'm not, you know, I mean, I'm not trying to break the project here, but if you go and look at it, we're going to have people that you know, pick trash and those sort of things within those tall grasses. That kind of thing's still going to happen. So we might not have to mow it, but we're still going to have to do some sort of maintenance to it. We just have to keep that in mind.
Is the wall maintenance free?
For the most part, once you put that wall up, they are maintenance free. We'll have to check seals and those sort of things every now and then on the backside. But for the most part, once it's up, it's up. You'll put a graffiti coating on there like we do on our flood walls. And so if we do get tagged in that regard, then it'll help removing the graffiti. But are they maintenance free? No, they're not either.
Further questions for City Engineer Alderman Straight?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Meyer, are walls 4 and 5 the same slope as 2 and 3? 1?
No. Let me check my diagram again here.
Just I'm thinking about the project as a whole.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and Alderman Straight, the other walls have a more gentle slope, and the other thing that they have going, they're not as high, so the soil pressure behind them isn't as great. Wall 2 is an interesting wall just because of its shape and how it kind of serpentines through the property. Wall 1 is another one that's difficult because we have our cooling equipment right there, so you know, we have some pretty critical infrastructure there that we want to make sure is kept safe. So wall 1 and 2 are the priority. The other ones, you know, it's just like any infrastructure. Got to keep an eye on it, and eventually we'll have to address those at some point in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
Further questions, Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Lance, with the alternatives, and obviously wasn't a part of that selection committee, so with the alternatives that were possibly looked at or entertained, I guess, in that meeting, was there an assumption or maybe just an understanding that those would increase the cost of the project, differ the project in what way as far as excavating 3rd Avenue there, digging close to the foundation to make an acceptable slope? Are we looking at a higher cost of that project, if you can speak to that?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pittner, you know, the cost would be lower doing some sort of an excavation in a slope back. But we did, again, it's a trade-off, right? So we'd be trading off some other things that we'd have to evaluate. Because I wasn't part of the original scope, I don't have those answers for you, but just logically looking at what we have to work with and trying to essentially double the horizontal distance back, you'd be well into 3rd Avenue and very close to the auditorium.
Just a continuation.
Alderman Pittner.
Just to be clear, that's why I asked. I didn't know if, instead of going a retaining wall route, if the scaling back, if that may have relocating utilities or anything like that, if that would actually in turn make the project more expensive or less expensive. I just wanted clarification on that. So.
Okay.
Final questions for our City Engineer. Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
Further comments or discussion on the amendment? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a quick question for our city manager. I see our friends from the Park District here tonight, and I'm curious about the auditorium and our memorandum of understanding that we're entering into as we consolidate Parks and Rec, and how that plays in with, I guess it doesn't necessarily have to do with walls 1 and 2, but it clearly has to do with walls 3, 4, and 5. And how is this going to shake out over the next couple of years, sir? Are we, you know, clearly we've had lots of discussions about taxing entities and mill rates and how we're going to pay for these ongoing projects. Can you just speak to that for me, Tom, so I can not think about it?
Yes. Mr. Mayor, Alderman Straight, the city has contemplated a 20-year lease of the auditorium facility to the Parks District as part of the Parks and Recreation Auditorium merger. And with that, the Parks District, and this is all in concept. I mean, none of this has been agreed to, right? But the Parks District will be working cooperatively with the city as it relates to a transitional period for operations and maintenance and utility costs and those sorts of things. One of the things that we feel strongly about is we have to protect the assets of the city. The auditorium will still be an asset of the city, and so will this building and the parking areas in and around each of those. So we want to make sure that those facilities continue to get used the way that they are, and if possible, and beneficial and cost effective, that they can have enhanced services, say, for example, parking or other sorts of things. So, you know, as it relates to the Park District's involvement in this, you know, they're not being asked to contribute any dollars to this. They're not being, I mean, it's essentially a city asset, you know, the structure of the ground which supports the auditorium and the parking and all of those things are the things that the city has an obligation to maintain, and that obligation will stay with it even through the contemplation of this lease agreement. Now, if at some point in time in the future, the Parks District ends up inheriting or buying or whatever, taking on some facilities, including the auditorium, you know, we would have to sort of figure out what we want to do at that point in time and where we are in projects and those sorts of things.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Further discussion on the amendment.
Mayor Sitma.
Alderman Walsky, anything new?
Just, I've offered this amendment because in the engineering report that was delivered to us in April 2016, we did not investigate alternatives. We investigated the cost of different wall types, but the assumption in the document that was given to us was that we were building a wall, that we were going to build a wall and we were going to add 50 parking spaces. At the $1.4 million rate, we are talking about $28,000 a parking space. I am not in a position, or I do not prioritize parking in this facility right now at that rate. And so I think we need to take a step back, recheck our assumptions, and consider some alternative proposals. I would gladly sacrifice some asphalt in the municipal auditorium parking lot. I would even consider closing the avenue access if it could save us $1 million or $2 million. So I'm not sure I would close the entire avenue, but I would certainly close the avenue access to that lower parking lot, or potentially restrict it to a one-way access so it wasn't nearly as wide. So I think these are alternatives that have not been explored because it's not in the engineering report. And before we make this commitment to spend these dollars, I think it's appropriate to get some alternative approaches.
Thank you, Alderman Walsky. Further discussion on the amendment? Just to the point of I won't be supporting the amendment. I look at traffic flow, if we're talking about reducing that, and traffic count for parking. If anybody's been to the Alara Center and knows one way in and one way out is not very good traffic flow, and that is that's a mess. When you talk about big events, we just had the district basketball tournament championship night, to where it was not only just absolutely packed within the parking lot, but everything up within the church all the way to Broadway, over in the Banks parking lot and beyond. And if we're talking about supplying this facility for use for the Parks Department, who wishes to grow activities and grow the different uses that the auditorium will be able to fundamentally utilize in the future, I'm not quantifying this in dollars per parking space. I'm quantifying this in what it is for that in the future. And aside from that, the assets that we're protecting within City Hall, within the auditorium, within the infrastructure that is Third Avenue, as well as the fact that this project has been delayed numerous years, long before I got onto council. So I won't be supporting the amendment. I will be supporting the original motion, if passed. Further discussion on the amendment? Further discussion? Please call the roll on the amendment.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
No.
Janser?
No.
Olson? No. Pittner?
No.
Padragula?
No.
Straight?
Yes.
Motion, the amended motion fails. Back to the original motion. Discussion on the original motion. Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, I know that you all know me to be a fairly idealistic person, and things don't necessarily always line up in my cosmos, but I'm aware that the Salvation Army has a challenge next door as well with their facility. You know, as we talk about the larger concept of these projects, I think it's important to consider, you know, what the use is. We're clearly entering into this discussion with the Park District. We all hope that we're going to not only need more parking, but maybe if Salvation Army moves to a larger facility that more adequately meets their needs, there's going to be a plot of land that's going to be available there. I don't, you know, these are all things that I keep in mind when I vote on this. I appreciate our city manager's work on it. The capital project list that we clearly have to address. These are the parts of this job that, frankly, I don't enjoy spending taxpayer dollars on, but I hear your point that it's a necessary need. To City Manager Barry's point, we got to protect the assets, and I hear you, sir, so that's my 2 cents.
Further discussion. Alderman Patagula.
Yeah, as I said before, I think I said before, I like Josh's idea of stepping back and looking at things, but as the mayor has said, I mean, we've had significant delays. This is a critical piece of infrastructure. We're trying to get more usage out of it. I want to be very clear. I'm not wanting to buy parking spaces. To me, that's the last on the list. So I very much agree with Josh on that issue. But I think this is a reasonable compromise to start this project, to protect, to shore up these hills. And then we still have, you know, walls 2, 3, and 4 that I think we can, you know, maybe step back and, depending on what the Salvation Army does and other people do, maybe look at a more enlightened approach. I was on the city police station remodeling committee, 15, 20 years ago, something like that. And the staff liaison we were working with, who had a degree in architectural engineering, if I remember correctly, said that for the purposes of law enforcement, this was an ideal location. I think in many ways it's an ideal location, not just for law enforcement, but it's a really lousy site. We have some tremendous topographical constraints in terms of the hills, and I just don't see in terms, again, I'm not an engineer, I'm a lay person, I just don't see how we're going to come up with a much better solution in terms of 1 and 2. Now for the others, I think maybe we can look, and we do have time, thankfully, but I'm just concerned that we're living on borrowed time with these walls. And, you know, I think we need to move forward, you know, again, with the realization that, you know, a significant chunk of it will be delayed, and then we can explore these other options and see what happens. So I'll be supporting the main motion.
Further discussion, Alderman Walski.
I may surprise a few folks here and suggest that I actually will be in support of the original motion. I think when we advanced this work and the hiring of these consultants 2 months ago, you know, there's significant expense that goes into seeking this work and responding to these RFQs. And I don't take that lightly. And so, you know, we've gone this far in terms of suggesting that we've asked this much of our consultant in terms of preparing the response for the RFQ. So I don't want the city to get a reputation for being what I would say is, you know, asking for work and then changing its mind. So on the design element, I'm going to approve this. I do not see myself supporting it when we get to letting bids on the construction side.
Further discussion.
Mayor.
Further discussion, Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, I think that this lends to more than just parking spaces. This is a public safety item. This is, in the city manager's report earlier, we talked about making the auditorium more of a palatable venue for events and marketable venue. I think this lends to all of that, to cut out parking spaces and to let this project kind of fall by the wayside, I think is the wrong decision. That's why I'll be supporting the original motion.
Further discussion on the motion. Further discussion. Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to section 14 of our agenda items. 14.1 is the revision of the personnel ordinance due to the merger with Minot Recreation Department with Minot Park District. It is recommended City Council pass an ordinance amending Chapter 24 of the Minot Code of Ordinances.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Straight. Discussion on the item. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion is approved. 14.2 is approve 3 eminent domain resolutions for the CDBG NDR acquisitions. These 3 properties are located in what is identified as Buyout Area 4 in the HUD-approved CDBG NDR action plan. The city has carried out the due diligence with the owners of those properties as set forth by HUD's involuntary acquisition guidelines and the requirements of the Federal Uniform Relocation Act. City Council approves the individual resolution authorizing the commitments of eminent domain proceedings for 805 2nd Avenue Northeast, 303 6th Street Northeast, and 208 6th Street Northeast. One moment. I need a motion.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Olson, second by Alderman Pittner.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you. And again, my name is Tori Maris Lindeman, and I live down on 11th Street Northwest. So before I get into why I was here for this, can I just ask, this ordinance, just for the record, this ordinance chapter 24 that you guys just passed, did the people of Minot vote for it? You know, because you're changing the law. Do they have to? That's just a question.
So we're on a different item. The answer
No,
is
I know, but that's just like general question. It could be whatever ordinance we want. You guys decide you're going to change the laws of the city of Minot, the municipal code, the ordinances.
Ms.
Do the
Lindeman?
people...
We're on a different item.
Exactly. This is where I'm getting to.
We are elected to do that, yes.
Okay, so you're elected. That's exactly where I was going with eminent domain. So here's the thing. When I saw that everybody over here, I don't know if they're familiar with this, but when they pushed the Make Minot plan, and Josh knows, because he pushed it, right? Josh Walski, you were saying how great it was and how you spoke with attorneys, right? When they pushed it and they changed how many city council members you have, they changed our home charter to allow them to change our laws without our vote. They get to do it.
Lindeman?
Eminent domain was the first thing you guys changed. Wait. 12 and a half, chapter 12 and a half, your previous mayor changed it. And you guys now can take anybody's house. You've included parks, recreation. These people are people that live in this house. You are giving them $30,000. You can't even rent the house for a year for $30,000. I urge everyone in Minot to do a little bit of homework, because this is unacceptable. You've cut it off so people at home can't hear it, because you don't want them to know the truth, just like the way Josh, who runs the Minot Voice, deleted the comment from the person on this.
Officially out of order.
I am? I'm
going to
sorry.
ask you,
what would you, tell me how am I out of order?
You are well outside the scope.
Why?
This issue.
This eminent domain issue?
This eminent domain for these.
I'm telling you that that's the issue that I have. That now you can come and take anybody's home. I have complained to HUD, unlike Mr. Barry, who said that they're fine. I'm bringing this up too, because this is unacceptable. You guys violated the rights of every citizen of Minot in 2016 with that. You sit there and you decide what laws you can change. You slid that in chapter 12 and a half on our municipal code, and you could take everybody's house, and you deleted the woman's comment who said, we're standing by it. We have a disabled son, and you've offered them crumbs. And you deleted it, of course, because it's not in your interest. You don't want the people to know the truth. But it's coming out, right, Sean? They're going to know, you know, all of you up there thought that I was kidding. Do you know how many people in Minot have asked me to come here today, every day? Because you guys don't control me. I don't work for you. And anyone listening, my email is tori@torisays.com.
Ms. Lindeman.
Contact me, because there's a huge federal case on this eminent domain that is pending. And I will maintain my journalistic integrity and not share your information. But on that, what have you offered these people? That's the question. You're taking their home. Why don't you tell everyone what you gave them for their house, where you're moving them out? Why don't you tell them?
When it comes to eminent domain, I would look to our city attorney, or I'm sorry, to Mr. Zakian and our other NDR program.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Zakian's an expert on this. He's done this around.
Ms. Lindeman, you have asked a question. We're going to get you an answer.
Yes, thank you.
So if you would, please step aside so Mr. Zakian can answer your question.
One quick statement. Mayor Sitma and members of the City Council, we are very limited in our ability to use eminent domain, both by the North Dakota Century Code and by the Uniform Relocation Act, which governs all federal grant programs. This program that you're authorizing for eminent domain, these 3 properties, has been reviewed and vetted by HUD and has been found to be compliant several times specifically. These 3 properties, we have attempted to negotiate with the property owners on a purchase price. We have reached a point where there's an impasse between what they want to sell it for and what we are able to justify to the federal government as being cost effective and efficient in the use of taxpayer money. I think it's important to realize that all this money that you're being asked to grapple with in terms of how to spend is taxpayer money. And it's our obligation as the stewards of that money to be sure that we use it in a prudent and most efficient manner. There will be still the opportunity, even when you authorize these 3 eminent domain proceedings, to negotiate and reach a settlement with these property owners. I would also point out that there are very strict, limited ability for any municipality in North Dakota to use eminent domain to acquire property. And it certainly is not the vast array of uses that the previous speaker alluded to. It is very limited to distinct public purposes, one of which is flood control and flood mitigation. And these 3 acquisitions are specifically for flood control projects that have been planned and designed to mitigate, if not eliminate, future flood experiences as we encountered in the city in 2011.
Thank you, Mr. Zakian. Any questions for Mr. Zakian?
I do. I have a question for him.
Is this new question? Please come to the microphone.
Okay. Mr. Zakian, so these properties, right, oops, I'm like super tall. These properties, how do you, I understand that you have to be prudent with taxpayer money, just like we are with HUD money, which doesn't run away if we don't use it right away. HUD said so. How do you explain to the citizens of Minot that you are removing families and paying them crumbs, and they did nothing but live there? They did nothing but buy the house. We have an obligation to the citizens of Minot to make it easy for them. You're supposed to help them be able to move to another house. You're not helping them. You are using your powers to manipulate these people, kind of like the Home Sweet Home. We didn't have to use that, but that was in the NAS project way, right? That's why we picked that one out of the 200 houses. But that's another topic. So the question is, why don't you at least pay their mortgages, what they owe? At least let them square away. Why isn't everybody in the city of Minot here advocating for them? You've been elected. You should be advocating for these people, not taking them for granted. I shouldn't be here. You should. You were elected. Where are you guys? You're okay with passing this? Yeah, we'll just take their business, 30 years, their home, whatever. Deal with it, people. Get out on the street and keep paying on a mortgage you still owe on and you don't have the house because we took it to put what? A green patch. That's the thing. Why aren't we looking at our citizens? We're paying the tax money. You're fleecing us. At least fleece it for a good reason.
I think, Mr. Zakian, the question was, in terms of the program for displacement, there is an entire legal process that has preceded this before eminent domain, if you would, sir.
Sure. Mayor and members of the council, I do want to correct one grievous error that the previous speaker just committed. Home Sweet Home was a necessary acquisition, not for NOAS. It was a necessary acquisition to allow the current construction of the flood wall. That's one of the major components in a long-term plan to protect the city from future devastating floods like in 2011. It was a necessary acquisition that had to occur. These 3 properties that we're talking about are also, again, no choice. The Army Corps of Engineers, the Souris Joint Water Board, and the city of Minot have all determined that these properties need to be acquired to continue this long-term flood control, again, to protect and preserve this city from having another 2011 flood experience. Specifically to her point, all property owners that are acquired through this involuntary buyout program, we do not only make sure that we provide them with a fair price for their property that is justifiable, since this is taxpayer money, that is justifiable as cost effective to HUD and other federal agencies. But we also provide them, if necessary, with relocation benefits to make sure that they have the opportunity to stay within the city of Minot and purchase another home.
Thank you, Mr. Zakian. As well as that, if you would, John, for just a moment, if you could just, you touched on a little bit of the process there and how we go through the voluntary acquisition, some of the programs, and then also some of the assistance, but then having to go through the appraisal process in the eminent domain. If you could just walk me through that for maybe anybody that is listening at home, so we have a full scope of understanding that this isn't just a grabbing of homes and throwing people out.
Mayor Sitma and also members of the City Council, actually these 3 properties have been at least 9 months, if not to a year, depending on which of the properties, have been going through an extremely due diligent process to get to this point. These property owners were notified more than a year ago of the need for these properties to be acquired for critically needed future flood projects. Under the rules that we are obligated to function, which again are set forth in Uniform Relocation Act, which is the federal statute governing all federal grant programs, not just HUD. We have to do an appraisal. It has to be independent. We then have to do a second appraisal. The second appraisal has to be by a separate independent appraiser. They both have to be licensed and be able to do business in the state of North Dakota. Though second appraiser reviews the first appraiser, and they have to reach an agreement to establish an offering price. There then is a third administrative review, which is done internally with the city to make sure that the value set and the process that was followed is consistent with the federal statute. We then make an initial offer to a property owner. The property owner then has sufficient time to he or she or them come back with a counteroffer. And this can go on for as long as there's an ability to try to close the gap between the 2 parties. It is only after an extensive going back and forth, if we reach a point where the price they're asking or the price we're offering that they're not willing to accept, there's too far a gap between what we can justify to the federal agency as being cost-effective use of these federal monies that we're then obligated to go to eminent domain. And again, to reiterate what I said before, even during the eminent domain process, and this has occurred in the past, we have been able to continue to work to negotiate with these property owners and have successfully reached conclusions for the acquisition of their properties before we've actually had to go to court. And even with the court process, and I would defer to the city attorney and our outside attorney, but the court process also provides a fair and equitable hearing between the property owner and the city. We just can't go in, just so everybody understands, we can't go in and tell the courts, we're going to take this property. There's an extensive hearing process, due diligence process. We make our case for what we believe the value is. The property owner makes their case for what they believe the value is, and then there's a decision made. So this is an extremely extensive process, and there's a lot of opportunity for the property owners to make their position known.
Thank you, John. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Sitma. John, just for the record, I'm going to bring it up since Ms. Lindeman brought it up. My uncle, Tom Waddell, is going to be in the buyout, I think probably in phase 5 or 6. He's probably going to be before this body for eminent domain. He's going to get a lot of favoritism, correct, because I'm sitting up here?
He'll get absolutely no favoritism whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. Zakian. I think we have a firm understanding, Mr. Mayor, forgive me, but Ms. Lindeman, many of us have been through the flood. Many of us have family that'll be part of future buyouts, that'll be part of future eminent domain. So let's be mindful of that as well.
And thank you very much for stating it. No one said that someone's getting preferable treatment. And Mr. Zakian, I would totally love those appraisals. But let me just tell you
Ms. Lindeman, you are out of order. Please sit down.
Me and I'm addressing him.
Please sit down. You are not recognized. Please sit down.
Thank you. Thank you. Not recognized. Thank you. I apologize.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. John, I just want to say that I appreciate your comments, and I've sat on the appeals committee, just for the record, for a short time, and it is with Alderman Olson as well, and it is a stressful and very contentious process at times. But it is a process, whether it be the appraisal, the review of an appraisal. And we're getting to the point with some of these properties where it is tough. It's getting to become an emotional attachment. It's becoming an emotional decision beyond just trying to get out of the way of the floodplain. So again, I just wanted to echo my support for the process. It's never easy. I have family members who are also in the buyout process, and I appreciate all the work that goes into it. It's the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. I work in real estate. Every time you come into someone's house that wants to sell, they think it's worth more than it is 95% of the time, because that's just the way it goes. What I have is the best and is second to none. So it's a process. And again, John, I just want to say thank you for explaining this process and just for the public to know that this isn't just us coming in and kicking people out and throwing their stuff on the curb. They have rights and they have appointments in place that protect them as homeowners, so to make sure they do get a fair shake. So again, I'm mounting out of a molehill with some of this stuff, but it is a due process. Just want to echo that.
Thank you, Alderman Pittner. Further questions for Mr. Zakian? Thank you, John. Further discussion on the item? Further discussion? Alderman Straight.
Mr. Simon, I guess I'm just going to kind of wrap up my thinking here of the last 3 years I've sat up here. And I think when I ran for this body, and I've attended, I think, 3 buyout meetings with you, sir. And I don't think by any way, stretch, form, do we ever shirk our responsibility in the heartfelt, difficult decisions that have to be made. And so this is a tough process. It's never fun to go through a buyout, just like it's never been fun to go to a buyout meeting and try to advocate for what I think is a project that's not only going to be the most expensive for the city, but also is going to be beneficial to prevent what happened in 2011 again. And this is why we got elected, to make these tough decisions. So I guess I just wanted to speak on that, sir.
Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Olson? Yes. Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to number 14.3. The City Council approved the underwriting guidelines for the CDBG NDR housing project.
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Straight, second by Alderman Janser.
Sure.
Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson? Yes. Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Motion is approved. 14.4 on our agenda is the engineering study at the intersection of 10th Avenue Southeast and 2nd Street Southeast. It is recommended that the council pass an ordinance on modifying 10th Avenue Southeast approaches from yield control to stop control at the intersection with 2nd Street Southeast.
Move.
Motion by Alderman Padragula, second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion, Alderman Padragula.
Just a brief comment. This seems like a very mundane thing, putting a stop sign instead of a yield sign. But I wanted to draw attention to the fact, from my perspective, that this is based on really, really, really good graphical presentation of information. I think in all the requests that I've sat looking at, this is probably the best, the clearest understanding for us lay people what's being proposed and what the issues are. So I wanted to commend the traffic engineer, the city engineer, and the GIS person, whoever else was involved in this, in coming up with a very clear, very rational proposal. The other thing I wanted to compliment staff on was the quality of the data. We're looking at traffic accident data. We're looking at measurements. This really, I think, is a good example of decision-making based on data. It's something that people in the municipalities and government field in general are pushing toward. And I think this is an excellent example of data-based, data-driven government and data-based decision-making. And I think it kind of fits in very well with the steps the city manager has been taking and urging us to take to gather more information and to present it in an understandable fashion. It may not be fancy, like putting some sensor on every car or something, but I think it should make a difference in terms of traffic safety, and it's a very, very welcome set of facts to have. So I'm really appreciative of what the staff has presented us, and I would strongly support this.
Thank you, Alderman Patagula. Further discussion? Alderman Walski.
Yeah, just a brief comment attached to this. Mr. Meyer, at one point last summer or last fall, we had a comment or a brief discussion about an intersection a couple blocks to the north. Just wanted to get that back on your radar now that we're kind of in the same neighborhood here.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Padragula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Olson. Yes. Bittner.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 14.5 is the Library Merger Committee recommendation. It is recommended to the council support the Library Merger Committee's continuing work towards the implementation, a plan to merge the Minot and Ward County libraries and allow city staff to continue working towards this implementation plan.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Olson, second by Alderman Padragula. And I think we do have a presentation in front of us as well.
I hope so.
Good evening, Janet.
Good evening. Back again. Can you hear me?
Is the light on the microphone?
It is.
Okay. We'll see
I'll
if we
speak
can,
up.
Derek, turn it up just a little bit.
All right. Thanks, Derek. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm here tonight with the Ward County Public Library Administrator, Carrie Ann Betcher, and we are here to just provide you with an update on the Library Merger Committee and to request that you support the committee's continuing work. The following presentation, which I will provide very briefly, is an overview of our committee's research into a 10-year forecast. Let me get this first slide up. So the first slide here shows the forecasted expenses for the two libraries over the next 10 years if we were to continue as is. So this is without a merger. This is what the costs would be. This will continue to be shown in the next few slides so you have a comparison. So what I have first is a bunch of numbers to show you how that graph was made. Don't worry, I don't expect you to read it. But it wasn't just guesswork. We did put a lot of work between the Ward County and Minot Public, thanks to the help of our finance department as well as the county auditor. This next slide here is the anticipated costs with the merger and expansions to the Minot Public Library. Our thought going into this from this point is that the Minot branch of the Ward County Library would move into the Minot Public Library, so there would have to be some expansion. Now, as we go along, I want to also remind you that in August 2018, a resolution was passed by the City Council and County Commissioners, and some of the main objectives of these will be highlighted here. So first of all, we had an objective to provide convenient, quality, and user-centered services to people of all ages. As we're looking into these numbers, we are trying to make sure that we are true to these objectives. The next graph here is the anticipated cost with the merger and bookmobile expansion. This does not include the enhancements to Minot Public Library. So as you can see, with just the expansion to the bookmobile, which I believe was an additional 15 hours a week of services, so more stops, we're still saving money with a merger. This really speaks to our second objective, which was to ensure equitable access to information resources for all residents across the service area. And with that, we were tasked to look at continued outreach to the county. And I feel that we've done a good job with that. And then also going into the next one, which is anticipated costs with the merger and the Kenmare expansion. So with this, you can kind of see in 2025, we're roughly estimating an expansion to the Kenmare branch would get us close to what we would be without a merger, but we're still staying below that line of what it would cost if we continued as is. And this was the final goal of the Library Merger Committee, which was to increase efficiencies. We do feel that we have discovered some efficiencies through the merger, but one of the through a potential merger. One of the big things we were asked was to complete a cost analysis related to combined services, and that's what this is. So when you look at all three of those, you're talking about an expansion to the Minot Public Library, an expanded services for the bookmobile, and an increase to the Kenmare branch. You are looking at an initial cost, of course, to expand the Minot Public Library, but then it starts to go down, and then you'll see an increase again in 2025 with the expansion to Kenmare. However, the other thing we tried to look at was that obviously services provided by the library, and I spoke to this a little bit at last council, has a value to it. So enhancing hours at the Kenmare branch and in the bookmobile would therefore increase the value to the people who receive services. So those different graphs there represent the annual estimated value. In a matter of numbers, we roughed out the value of enhanced bookmobile services and Kenmare branch services to be about the same because we'd be expanding their hours. So you'd be looking at a 10-year value of over $95 million and a 10-year cost of just under $25 billion. So the return on investment, basically $1, for every $1 spent on a merger, the citizens would receive $3.82 back. Total annual return on investment, or not annual, over 10 years, would be over $3 million. And again, this I spoke to a little bit last week about how we determine the return on investment. So the next steps for the Library Merger Committee are an authorization from this body and then also from the county commissioners, which Carrie and I will be presenting to tomorrow, to continue working toward an implementation plan. Obviously, this has taken a lot longer. There's been a lot of work involved in it, and that does include staff time as well. So we feel like it's a good time to check in with the council and the commission to make sure that we're on the right track. If the Library Merger Committee then decides, then we'll need to make a decision on whether or not to support or oppose a merger. If a recommendation to support a merger is approved by both the Minot City Council and the Ward County Commission, then we have to go to a public vote. So there's still plenty of steps in place for us, but we feel like we have made a very good dent in the information. And that's all I have.
Well, Janet, Carrie Ann, let me be the first to say thank you for the outstanding work and the commitment to the process at this point. Carrie Ann, do you have anything you want to add?
I guess as far as what the committee has covered, Janet pretty much covered all of it. I guess, do you guys have any questions for me?
Any questions for our librarians? Alderman Janser.
I would just echo the thanks. I do have one question. So the vote that has to take place, is that a county-wide vote, or is that just for the city, or
it would have to be countywide.
Combined county-wide? Okay,
yep.
Thanks.
Further questions for our librarians? And I want to also commend Alderman Olson for helping with this process and everyone else that's been a part of the process. I know it's been a lot of work. As we saw, a lot of numbers. It hasn't been easy to navigate through all of this, so I'm very, very happy to see that not only that the numbers showed what they did show, but the due diligence that has gotten us here. So thank you, everyone that was part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments or discussion? Alderman Olson.
I would just encourage the council to vote to approve to continue this work. I've got kind of a sore throat tonight. There has been a lot of work put into it, and I think we've got numbers that are very impressive. But we have more questions that need to be answered, and so I'm hoping that we'll get approval tonight, and we'll get approval tomorrow from the County Commission so that we can move forward. Thank you.
Alderman Padragula.
I wanted to join Lisa in asking you to approve this. I've sat in on all of the meetings that Lisa has chaired, and a lot of staff time and leadership time has been put into this matter. I feel very, very comfortable, and this is, again, another success story where we're talking about enhancing the quality of services and saving money, and also providing a better and stronger link between people living inside the city of Minot and our rural neighbors in metropolitan or greater Minot. I've been very, very impressed with what's gone on in this committee. Very strongly endorse this. It would be nice if all our decisions and plans would work out this well.
Further discussion? Alderman Straight.
Mr. Mayor, thanks. I guess I want to commend Alderman Olson and our librarians as well. To carry on with Alderman Padragula's point, I think this is another clear example of why Minot is a fantastic hub city. I think this is a larger story that we're going to tell, hopefully, over the next couple of months and the years ahead. And it also just, I think, speaks to the fact that we are all very mindful of the dollars we spend, the efficiencies that we try to find, and this is where I'm very excited about what's happening in this community, because I think that Minot is leading by example, and the city of Minot in particular, working with the Park District and obviously the county on 2 initiatives. I think we're doing the very best we possibly can to be stewards of taxpayer dollars.
Further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. 14.6 is approved the subrecipient agreement with Essential Living. It is recommended that the City Council approve the subrecipient agreement with the Essential Living Incorporated to construct 22 twin homes for low to moderate income residents.
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Straight.
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I just wanted to point out, I had a conversation with Mr. Walker earlier today about this particular agenda item, and I think this is one of those examples of, we talk a lot about the importance of infill and building kind of within, and this is one project that City Manager Barry spoke earlier to the point that we really need to hit that. There's an extreme vulnerable population need in town, and that's obviously played out in the memo earlier today about what Essential Living had done with the 41 apartment units that have been renovated, and I think this is a continuation of it, and I look forward to see what happens ahead.
Thank you, Alderman Straight. Further discussion on the motion before us. Further discussion. Please call the roll.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Motion is approved. 14.7 is the purchase of a nuisance home. It is recommended the City Council approve the purchase of the property located at 1004 3rd Avenue Northwest from Ward County. This is on the list of our zombie homes, as well as pass an ordinance to amend the 2019 annual budget to increase the capital purchase expenditures for the property, for the purchase of a property located at 1004 3rd Avenue Northwest, be funded with demolition cash reserves.
Moved.
Moved by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Padragula. Discussion. Alderman Padragula.
Just a request for city staff, if prior to our next meeting, we could have a current list of all the zombie homes out there, and particularly an update on the status and identification of any of what the roadblocks are. We hear various things about different properties, and I like to see it in a current list, whether it's problems dealing with some out-of-state bank or whatever the issue might be. Not only this property, but it's several others haven't been touched, apparently entered since the flood. You know, goodness only knows what's breeding inside of them. And since we are at the start of the staff planning process for the budget, I think it's very important we get an idea as to what properties are out there and have a discussion about allocating resources if necessary. It's been over 7 years, and I'm at the limit of my patience with that. And if we see structural problems in addressing the issue, then I think we need to go after those instead of looking at it just as a property-by-property issue.
Alderman Padragula, I think Mr. Zakian actually has a current list that he supplied to me just recently, so it should be very easy to get you that list as well.
That's what I was thinking.
Offsetting further comments that eminent domain is not easy, with zombie homes remaining being the proof. Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Padragula, I can add just a little bit of insight briefly. We have dealt with a number of these houses as they've come up or have been available. This particular agenda item was foreclosed last fall by Ward County for non-payment of taxes. So that is how this one came to the forefront. And essentially we are purchasing this, this home for a portion of the back taxes that were owed on the property. So this is something that some of these houses are deemed to be structurally sound, but this particular one has not been cleaned up since the flood happened. It's boarded up, it's secure. So there are some limitations on what the city can do if they are structurally sound, even though they may be a nuisance. We have another house that we're working on that is in foreclosure through the bank. So as these properties come up through either tax foreclosure or bank foreclosures, we address them as we can. And we are also going back through the list to reassess some of these properties to see if there are other actions we can take with them.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. Further discussion on the motion? Further discussion?
Just a quick question.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, Alderman Pittner.
Maybe a question for Dave. Dave, just with these funds and the purchase of these funds, is there any restrictive nature of these funds, whether the funds that we're purchasing with or demolishing the property, as far as what we can do if we can sell the property or in the future?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pittner, these funds that we're using to acquire this property were set aside for these nuisances in the past, and they are sitting there and available for this case. So we would acquire the property using city funds that are set aside for this. The demolition contract could be either through city funds as well, or a combination of city funds and CDBG or NDR dollars.
Okay. Just a continuation.
Alderman Pittner, yes.
Just, and maybe not a question, but a comment, just I'd like to see that these funds, if we are able to, again, purchase these with funds where we can release this property or sell it back, get it back on the tax roll, see the infill. I just want to make that comment so that it's known, and maybe John has some enlightenment here.
Mr. Zakian, thank you.
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Pittner, it is a good question. By the way, we can also refund the city for whatever Dave has to advance. This is an eligible NDR expense. Now, I'll be very brief, but the process that we've set up, and I want to echo what Mayor Sitma said for the record, we cannot use eminent domain for these properties. So this shows you the limitations. It's one of the frustrating limitations, I will say, because, as you all know, these homes have not been touched for more than 7 years. We're going to acquire these properties as best we can. We are then going to demolish them. We will then come back to you as a council with a recommendation for selling them and for the purpose of selling them. Any income that would be generated from the sale of those properties, we can then pour back into all the NDR programs. It'll be known as program income. It is a process that we have to follow under the HUD rules. We're not going to hold on to these properties. We're going to try to come back to you with a recommendation for the most constructive use possible. Once you've approved the recommended use we present, or you choose another use, we then just have to go back to HUD and they have an opportunity to comment. And once they approve that, we can then, through auctions, sell these properties. So the intent is to get these back into productive uses, in addition to eliminating the current nuisance that they are.
Thank you, John. And the last point I would make is the remaining zombie homes have been identified as not in our flood control plan, just for reference.
Right.
Thank you, John. Further discussion? Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson? Yes. Pittner?
Yes.
Padragoulis?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion is approved. 14.8 is a snow plan policy change proposal. Due to the circumstance observed following a recent heavy snow event, it is clear that the snow events do not diminish the demand for pedestrian infrastructure and sidewalks. The item before us recommended the City Council consider changes to the city's snow removal plan that includes an additional of arterial pedestrian snow routes and add them to the operational plan.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Alderman Wolski, second by Alderman Straight. Discussion. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. This was the result of a discussion item at the last meeting. I did not get a chance to invite comments from staff, so if there are any comments from our Public Works Director or Assistant Public Works Director or any other staff members, I would invite them to come share their thoughts on this, because I think it needs a firm discussion.
Public Works Director Jonason.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you. I do have a couple comments, concerns. I think it's admirable what Mr. Walsky's trying to do, Alderman Walsky's trying to do, but it does present some issues. You know, adding just Broadway for an arterial sidewalk, we get calls on a lot more areas other than Broadway. And I've seen myself people walking on Burdick Expressway, on sidewalks that aren't cleared, so they're out in Burdick driving. So I guess I question, how do you determine which ones make this arterial list? You know, 3rd Street, I think, is an arterial street a lot of people use. 6th Street out here, 16th Street, we get calls on the 16th Street overpass over Highway 2 and 52. So to I guess, single this one out, I think should be given consideration if you're going to do this, to add some others. The other thing is, with the limited staff that I have, you have to realize if we're going to start prioritizing the sidewalks to get cleared ahead of residential, that's going to extend the amount of time it takes to get into the residential area, which is going to extend the amount of time for your emergency services to get in there, police, fire, ambulances. I mean, it's just additional time that's it's going to take, because I have to pull staff off either a plow or something to do this clearing. You know, like I said, if we weren't thin of staff, I think it'd be a great thing to do, but I think a lot of consideration needs to be considered on prioritizing this ahead of clearing the residential areas. You know, we do make every attempt possible during a snow event that as soon as we can free somebody up, whether it's if we don't have a need for somebody in a sander or one of the pieces of equipment, you know, if we're fully staffed, that's the other thing. You know, we don't always have a full crew running, so it makes it even more difficult to pull somebody off. To try to pull somebody off as soon as we can, to concentrate on exactly this, the arterial ones, to get them open. Because a lot of these, like Broadway, 3rd Street, 16th Street overpass over the 2 and 52 bypass, we can go through and open them up. But in order to clean them out completely, we have to blow those out into the road and then pick it up and haul it away. So that operation comes a lot later on in the process. So, like I said, there's a map up that Derek pulled up for you to take a look at. If you look at the red lines, those are the sidewalks that we clear along a lot of the arterial streets. And like I said, I think we need to look bigger picture if we're going to start classifying arterial sidewalks. If you want to add a couple staff, I'd gladly take a couple additional staff to do this work.
Thank you, Dan. Questions, Alderman Janser?
Yeah, I have a question, Dan. So, you know, in this, in the list of priorities that we're being asked to alter, so when does the sidewalk clearing that you do now, because I, you know, drive over the bridge and the snow has been cleared, when does that currently take place? Is it after the Central Business District alleys and so forth in the current number E in the priorities, suggested number D if we change it? You know, when do you do that?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, typically we'll start on the sidewalks after we get all of the snow routes, the hills, the schools, and the residential open. A lot of times, and most times, you know, we're there even before that. Like I said, as soon as we have a spare body that doesn't need to be either on a plow or in a sand or salt truck salting the roadway, we'll pull that person and start opening up sidewalks. So a lot of times it is at the same time as a residential snow plowing is going on, but in our process, it's slated that the sidewalks will be done after the residential area.
Okay, so if I may
Yes,
continue.
please.
Okay, so typically that would be maybe before the central business district gets cleaned out?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, it would be before the central business district gets hauled.
Gets hauled?
Gets hauled away. Yeah,
Okay.
we would open it up before that. It would be, this winter, we've been getting all of the roads opened up, including the residential, in 72 hours or less.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Further questions for Director Jonason? Thank you, Dan. Further discussion from the council, Alderman Patagula.
To bring up another complicating factor, the mayor and I have been on the receiving end of some emails and photographs from a constituent who has raised some very good and very serious concerns regarding the widths of some of the streets. And to check out his concerns, I went driving last weekend, not this weekend, but the one prior to that. And the big concern was that some of the main streets, particularly 16th and Burdick and Broadway, are very narrow. And I had a very harrowing experience when I was driving up 16th Street by KMOT, where what was 2 lanes going north at 40 miles an hour, south of 40 miles an hour, all of a sudden turned into 1.5 lanes. And there was a big pickup truck right next to me. So the city manager has responded in a very nice, extraordinarily prompt fashion to the constituent, and the constituent and I have been following up on this, and I've asked the city staff to give us a sense of how much money and staff and equipment it would cost, and if there are any technical issues. As soon as I wrote the memo, I drove a couple days later on one of the other streets, and what I thought should happen had happened already. The snow was pushed completely to the end of the edge of the curb, widening the street significantly. But that, I think, is probably a more serious issue than the sidewalks. As much as I'm a fan of pedestrian use, and I would support this particular one because of the critical nature of Broadway. In fact, we only have one sidewalk there now. I think there are other snow challenges, and I want to make sure that this isn't misunderstood in any way as a criticism of our staff. I think they do a very good job with the resources they have, but I think the issue for us may be this larger one that Dan raises of resources. So I'd be willing to broaden it to Broadway Bridge, but I think when we look at that big map, I see other issues that are far more important and far more dangerous.
Alderman Janser.
I guess, in looking at this, and I understand that people want to be able to walk, and they want to be able to walk as early as possible after a snow event, maybe during a snow event. I don't know, but I have a hard time supporting this as it is because I think. There are perhaps some details, as the Public Works Director talked about, and there may be some, art to it as opposed to, strict prioritization in this document that we have. And so, saying that, okay, well, we're going to do arterial pedestrian and we're going to do the Broadway Bridge before we clear residential areas, I don't think is the right answer. I think we need to look at this a little more deeply. And so, I can't support this as it is, but I think it's something that maybe we ought to give back to city staff and let them take a little more of a look at it and perhaps come back to us with something that includes the details that probably should be addressed in this. So I would make that motion that we give it to city staff to work with and come back at our next meeting.
Second.
So it's an amendment to the motion. It's a new motion. We had a motion to approve.
Mr. Mayor. I think he may be referring it to staff.
Oh, referring to
so
staff?
that
Okay.
could take priority.
Okay. Okay. So we have a motion to refer to staff and a second. Who was the second?
I was.
Alderman Patagula. Alderman Pittner, I saw you have your hand up here.
Just some comments, and I kind of wanted to echo Mark's comments as far as in its current form. I think there's some revision. I think it is a good idea. I think there's people that do walk in the wintertime. My wife's a runner. She runs in the wintertime. It's always she's always pleased to have the sidewalks shoveled or snow removed. But just during the last snow event that we had, the 12-inch snow event, we sat up at this dais and raved on how efficient and how proud of our snow removal was by city staff. And I think adding additional responsibilities, we're going to see a reduction in quality and response time. And to echo Alderman Padragula's comments, again, there are plenty of spots in Minot and some major roadways where they could be widened and all that stuff takes time. I understand. Again, I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good conversation to have, but I like the idea of sending it to the staff to have some revisions.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'm going to just point out the fact that we have a city bus service, and that's be mindful of the very many folks that can't afford a vehicle. The current system as it stands, you have to flag down the bus. I can't think of anything more ridiculous than how you have to jump out, and it's a challenge. I'm not going to deny that, but I saw a gentleman the other day waiting on the corner by Starbucks, the old Starbucks on the corner of Burdick and Broadway there, and the fence that's currently around the old Starbucks area. And I feared for him, and I took a photo of it from my vehicle which wasn't a smart move, I'm going to admit it right now, but it was a long red light. But I watched him, and it was like old school watching Frogger transpire right in front of me. And I think we have to be very mindful of we don't embrace, obviously, we're not super supportive of pedestrians, but I think this is part of the larger conversation as well. I know our Park District friends are here. They're going to have a public meeting relatively soon about their priorities. Clearly, I think we're trying to get improved user groups, and I think we need to obviously do a better job in many different cases. And I think the city, we at least have to talk about where we're collecting people that are riding our services and our bus. So maybe that's my starting point back to staff, and let's just be mindful that many of us are not driving.
Thank you, Alderman Straight. I just have a couple short pieces to add here. One, I do want to commend Alderman Walski on bringing up kind of the bigger issue of accessibility in our town. It's no secret that we have our challenges with sidewalks and with our streets. I had the opportunity to spend about 45 minutes with Bismarck Mayor Bakken, who assured me that there's quite a few constituents that they have the worst snow removal in North Dakota. So it's not unique to Minot with some of our challenges. Where we do have our challenges is time. Days like today where the wind's blowing, I take a look even down our sidewalks that have blown shut in a matter of one day. And that's no different from a lot of our roadways. It comes down to management of assets and where the needs of the many and the needs of the few. Unfortunately, with this one, I think it does open up the broader conversation that absolutely we do need to consider accessibility in our town in a very real way, as I'm seeing more people riding bikes at 6 below. Last week, it does happen. People are really using a lot of our sidewalks and streets much more frequently than they used to. Well, Alderman Walski, I can't support it in this form at this point. I think it does absolutely to Alderman Janssers to refer back to city staff for kind of a larger, longer look at what we can, but more importantly, what that cost will be.
Right.
So that we can make that assessment. Alderman Walski.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I appreciate everybody's comments. Obviously, I brought this forward because I saw something that needed to be addressed, and in the spirit of always improving, let's start a discussion. Let's have a conversation about this. And, I think it is born from a bit of a catch-22, right? Which is when we get a significant snow event and it is difficult to get around in cars, people turn to their feet, right? So we're sort of stuck in this conundrum of trying to address where people are going. And in some of these cases, they're literally getting forced into the streets. And that's why this particular issue is here, is because I had a a situation on the Broadway Bridge where I had to move my truck quickly to get out of the way of a pedestrian who was traveling in a traffic lane in the morning during the dark, so that's why this is here. I'm happy to support a motion to refer it back to staff and take a little longer look at this. But I do think, we've been saying for more than a few years, we need to focus on pedestrian. We need to focus on walkability. These things all tie together, and ultimately, I would like to see this incorporated at a slightly higher priority level. Obviously, resources are always a question. Do I see us wanting to spend lots more money? No. But if there are some ways to sort of massage our policy to get these places, some of these critical areas considered a little earlier, I'm going to probably ultimately be supportive of that. I want to introduce two other ideas that are attached to snow removal in some form. Obviously, we've all recognized Broadway as being a fairly significant challenge, right? The commercial operators there are working to clear their parking lots, and oftentimes the sidewalks are the beneficiary of that snow. Perhaps a bid district for property owners on Broadway should be contemplated with a fairly narrow scope of maintaining sidewalks. That idea might be able to accommodate some of these challenges and not have it rest solely on the citizens of Minot and the taxpayers of Minot, but on the property owners within that corridor. And to speak to Alderman Padragula, one of your concerns in terms of widening streets, I saw a policy out of Minneapolis recently that during snow events, they do not allow on-street parking, period. And so, that's a pretty dramatic, draconian move. I'm not sure if the citizens of Minot would support it, but it sounds like in Minneapolis, the cars have places to go. There is parking facilities, there is room, there is infrastructure that is accommodating those vehicles. And I think that's obviously one of the major challenges our snow removal team is dealing with, is getting around parked cars, particularly on those narrow streets. So maybe a more aggressive policy in terms of, in these larger events, no street parking. I think that would probably improve the efficiency overall of our equipment and the resources that are already working. It would allow us to push those streets further back at the beginning of those events. So, like I said, I have no problem referring this back, like it's brought in the spirit to keep these conversations active so that we're always improving.
Further discussion on the motion to send back to staff for assessment. Further discussion. Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson? Yes. Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion is approved. That takes us to number 15 on our items. This is
9.
Did I miss one?
14.9.
I did. 14.9. Thank you. This is the contract for planning consulting services. Recommendation of the contract for consulting services with the SRF Consulting Group Incorporated for planning consulting services to assist in a comprehensive update to the Minot zoning ordinance as presented. It is also recommended that the council pass an ordinance to amend the 2019 annual budget to increase the planning department's professional service contract expenditures to be funded with cash reserves.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Alderman Wolski, second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. So this was sent back to us a couple weeks ago, or sent back to staff and the Planning and Zoning Steering Committee. Last week had what I would say was a very productive meeting with members of staff, members of the Zoning and Planning. This is what I would call maybe the top level of services that's going to be available to us, but I think there's a lot of will inside the Planning and Zoning Steering Committee to take hold of more of a project management aspect of this. I think the expectation is that we will not get to the top end of this budget or of this proposed plan, but having it at this level leaves it available should we need it. So with the understanding that the Planning and Zoning is going to have I'd say, more conscientious hand in managing this project, I'm comfortable approving this tonight.
Thank you, Alderman Wolski. Any other discussion? Alderman Padragula.
I've sat in with Alderman Walski on this committee, and I very much second his remarks. I think we have a much better sense of how we'd use the money and the expertise of outside people. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel, especially when we don't have too many people to drive the wheel on our staff at this point. So I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think the consultation process should be a lot more productive this time.
Thank you, Alderman Padragula. Mr. Neither, if you would, just for the record, name and address.
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, a sincere thank you for your time. I'm Tyler Neither. I reside at 3312 20th Street Southeast. And yes, that is correct. Last Wednesday, we did meet to discuss this proposal for a planning consultant. And if I could just give you an update of over the last few years, we've made a lot of progress on the steering committee, making Minot a lot more friendly pace to invest money and to build our community. But we are at a little bit of a standstill right now as to a fork in the road. Where do we go? We do have action items that we need to address. However, as it's been indicated, we don't quite have the horsepower to get there. So on our meeting Wednesday, February 27th, we did receive consensus that yes, the steering committee is in favor of this proposal and having a consultant. And I feel with having the consultant on board that we can get over some of these major obstacles that's been in front of the steering committee this past 2 years. So,
thank you for that update, Mr. Neither. Any questions? Alderman Straight?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Neither, I just wanted to know, I spoke to a couple of builders in town over the last week that really commend you and many of the others that have kind of been way behind the scenes, obviously pushing this forward, but this is something that's going to be a huge benefit for our community. And so I thank you, sir, for your time. And I think all of us up here commend the board for sticking with it because it's clearly something that's been needed. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Further discussion on the item? Further discussion? Call the roll.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Motion approved. That moves us to number 15, our department reports. And do we have Mr. Meyer? Mr. City Engineer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Great to be back in front of everyone tonight here. Looking forward to the conversation. So I wanted to introduce our new and improved capital improvement plan for 2019 to 2023. And as the city manager had spoke about earlier, we all put a lot of time into this. This is probably, I would say, 700 to 800 hours of staff time in total between not only myself, but for sure the other city departments. This is truly an effort by the team. And we had every department that supplies projects to our capital improvement planning process participate. I do want to call out a couple people. Jenna Vollmer in finance was instrumental in this and helping us to create these spreadsheets. They're very complicated. They link to a lot of things, so her expertise was very helpful. And of course, in my department, Alicia Erickson, who continues to do an excellent job for us in GIS. All of this data has to be brought together and then mapped and databases built. So she's been working behind the scenes to make this all possible. So wanted to thank them and then all of our city departments as well. So getting into this here, the city's been doing capital improvement planning since its inception. Every city does this. It's a normal process that we undertake to make sure that we're planning for the growth of the city appropriately. Throughout the years, and even in my time here at the city, the last 10 years, this is actually probably now our third iteration of what our capital improvement plans look like. Typically, it's a list of projects with associated costs that we compile and then we put in the budget. And it's very common to see a 5-year horizon in that. Some cities do 10, but 5 is kind of the industry standard. City leadership, you all, had expressed a desire for a new way of showing this information. You wanted to help us or to help the community adequately plan for infrastructure, but we were missing some data. So We put a team together to work on this, and what we have in front of you tonight is the fruits of those efforts. Traditionally, the engineering department, my department, has been the author of the capital improvement plan. We assemble all this information from the other city departments, and what we ask for is a list of projects with their start year, what the title is, of course, how it's going to be funded, and what that cost is. We then assemble that document and we send it to the finance department for review, and then it's incorporated into the back of the city budget. It's been like that for many, many years, and I know you've all seen those. Based on the request for more detailed project descriptions and a more robust display of information, we had to develop a new process. There just wasn't enough there from some departments to be able to do what we wanted to do. However, that said, we didn't change or alter the internal departmental processes that, say, maybe the Public Works Department or my department would go through. And we didn't want to alter their decision-making. They're the professionals that look at these projects. They know what they're doing. We just needed the information from them to be able to put this together. But we needed a standardized way of accounting for costs and displaying this information. In the past, you might have seen project estimates that would come in, and maybe only the city's cost share was shown in the capital improvement plan. Maybe it was a $10 million project, but we were only showing it valued at $2 million because that was our in. So now we have a consistent way of displaying that information across all projects. It wouldn't be an engineering presentation without a couple of flowcharts. That's kind of what we do. Eye rolls from all my constituents in the back, but basically what we start off with was, well, do we need a project? And if the answer is yes, then we need to start going through this process. So the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things is actually fairly similar. We did have to add a couple of things to get to where we are now. We developed this new CIP worksheet, which I'll get to in a minute. We wanted to get council's buy-in early in the process. So generally, you don't see the capital improvement plan until September at budget time. Now you're seeing it now. And so the thought there was, if we can get buy-in up front, that'll help us inform our budget process, and then the modeling begins from the finance department. You'll now see a standalone document. So that 154 pages that we put together, that's the CIP. It's not going to be in the budget anymore. There might be portions of it that go in the document, but the CIP will now be standalone. And of course, our GIS database will be created and maps will be put on. We wanted to have that done for tonight, but there just wasn't enough time. So over the next few weeks, we'll be taking this data and building that website, and then eventually we'll make that open to the public. And when you know it, it's another flowchart. So basically, I wanted to go through how we put these projects together. And like I mentioned before, we didn't ask the departments to change the way they're doing things. This is how we put projects together. It's just in a different format now. So when we look at scoping projects, first we take a look at what's the best available data. Do we have any reports available to us, studies that we've done? And we use that information, if it's available, to start scoping a project. And then from that, we can develop costs. Most of, if you've looked at some of the data that we put in the CIP, you'll see that the lion's share of project costs, or revenues, excuse me, in our CIP are from state or federal agencies. And so getting their buy-in and programming those projects with them is absolutely critical. And so we usually have some sort of agreement or programming component of these projects with them, and then that helps to inform not only the project costs, but then what's the timeline, because we have to fit with that agency on when they can deliver those funds. All of that information is then combined into this CIP spreadsheet, and that helps to compile these costs. Then the departments will now rank projects. We haven't done that before. I guess in this format, I mean, really, the ranking before was, well, this project has to go in a certain year because of its need and desire for the community. So we still do that, but now there's a number behind it. Finally, we send that off to the finance department for their review, and then the spreadsheets are compiled. So this is the blank template. This is the summary sheet, and if you look through the appendices in the CIP document, you'll see all these filled out for each individual project. Basically, what this front-end sheet does is it summarizes all of the input data that I just talked through into this front end. It shows the 5-year expenditures, such as capital outlay, personnel and operational costs. It describes what the revenue sources may be for this project. There's a section for project scoring that's based on the priorities and the information that the departments put together, which we'll get to in a minute. And then finally, we put a project map on there so people that are looking at this project know where it's located within the city. We also have a questionnaire that we've developed, and the purpose of this is to try to get more information about the project. So instead of just seeing a table with a project name and a dollar figure next to it, now we get some more information about what is the project and why is it important and how it's going to be funded. We want to talk about how this project might compare to other projects within the department and why it's ranked higher or lower. And then we will also want to talk about operation and maintenance. What are some of those concerns with this project, and then any other information that might be important. So this is the workhorse part of this spreadsheet document. This part isn't in the appendices for the project, but this is where all the inputs go. And so this is where we talk through all the revenues within that 5-year period that are going to be put in that project, all the capital outlays. We get pretty detailed on some of these breakdowns. Not all projects are going to have that level of detail at this point, but if we have it, we want to show it. If there's a project such as a fire station that might take personnel costs, we want to account for that here. We can put lump sum wages in there, and then there's some multipliers in there that give us an idea of what the benefits may be, so we can account for some of those things. And then ongoing operational costs, at this point on a project, they're more higher level. We don't go into is it power or gas. It's just classified as utilities. So I wanted to give an example here of what this looks like and how it's developed. So this is our 31st Avenue reconstruction project. You can see here on the back end when we input all these dollar amounts, we have all the revenues that come into the project that are shown in that 5-year period, all the capital outlays, and then we take a best guess at what some of the utility bills might be for powering streetlights. All that information is then transferred back to that summary sheet, and it's displayed in this manner so that you can get the 5-year cost information. We then put the scoring criteria in there that the departments have all come up with, and we get to the final score at the end, and then of course we create that GIS map. So speaking of scoring, just a little insight on how my department would score a project. So we have the same scoring criteria that we use for every single project. And so we don't want to develop a criteria that then allows us to cherry pick a project or make an arbitrary decision based on what we think is good or not. So you will see this same criteria used for the 31st Avenue project that was used for the City Hall retaining wall, that's used for ADA upgrades on Burdick Expressway. And that's how we as professionals analyze these projects. So as an example, like I alluded to earlier, my department especially, dealing on the street side, lives and dies by federal or state funding from FHWA. So if my project qualifies for that funding, we're going to get 10 points automatically. If that funding is programmed within the current year, which 31st Avenue is, it's going to get another 10 points. If it's 5 years out into the future, it's only going to get 2. And the theory there is the farther the project out, the funding may not be known or locked down yet, so it should have a lower priority as a project that is imminent. It's ready for construction. When we talk about the need to replace critical infrastructure, some of the things that are important to us is the infrastructure past its typical design life? Does the project have a large population that it serves? On our project here, the pavement is in satisfactory to poor condition, depending on where you're at in the corridor. Again, we used our best available data, the pavement study that we had not too long ago to help us make some of these decisions. The water and sewer on the corridors in good to poor condition depending on where you're at. Some of it's brand new, some of it's 40-some years old. And of course, storm sewer is in poor condition, so we scored this out at a 17. Safety improvements. Will we have an increase to public safety, or is there an issue with public safety that we need to address on this project? Yeah, there is. It's riddled with potholes. It has poor lighting. There's frequent flooding, and all these considerations would then lead to a higher point score. Classifications of roadways. Obviously, you want to invest more dollars into higher classes of roadways that carry more traffic, and we reflected this in this category. 31st Avenue is a minor arterial. It scores 15 points. How feasible is the project? Is it easy to permit? Do we need a consultant right away? Those sort of things. It's fairly straightforward in design and permitting. We do need some right away for the project, and a consultant was required, so it didn't get all 10 points, but it got quite a few. And can we program this project with others to help? Can it be phased? Can we save dollars by pairing projects together? And on this one, yes, we can. We can replace some of those old water mains and valves while we're there and we have the street tore up. And we can phase this project to provide access to residents. So when you total up all the points, it scores an 89. And of course, we answered the questions that we had for the project to help describe what it is and where the dollars are coming from. And finally, what are some advantages of this new process that we've gone down? So each of the department now uses the exact same process for each and every single project that's put in the CIP. So you always know that a project's getting evaluated the same way. The same inputs are going in. We're accounting for costs the same way. So there's additional consistent information. Then each department's projects are assembled into a single spreadsheet so that we can compare them side by side and then use the scores that the department heads scored their projects on and then put those in a rank 1 through X. We build a summary spreadsheet, and that's what's shown here on the screen. We can take all of the data and costs from all the other departments and assemble them into a series of tables so that you can do data analytics on it and do a side-by-side comparison on where the dollars are coming from. You know, what are the dollars per year by department, et cetera. So by combining all this information into one document like this that's consistent, we think we have some pretty good advantages here. So what I wanted to do tonight, Mr. Mayor and Council, was just give you an introduction on how we did this. So as you're looking at the document, I'm hoping that what you take away from this presentation tonight is there's a lot of thought and time that went into this. And if you have any specific questions on projects, we can answer those now or in the future or whenever. And then next month, I'd like to come back and we can either do another presentation or just put it on the agenda again for approval or editing. So with that, Mayor, I'd be open to any questions you may have.
Mr. Meyer, thank you so much. Intro to CIP 101. Any questions for any questions for Lance? Alderman Padragula.
More of a comment. I've been looking at these things. My first one was in 1998. This is many orders of magnitude improved from what we had, and I just can't say enough good about this. Data-based, it allows opinions to come in. I particularly like the fact that each department has its own kind of way of looking at things, but there's a common framework. This is outstanding. I mean, I can't say enough good about it. I'm a fan of numbers, obviously, but at some point, you know, at our level, it's going to be more than numbers. It's going to be politics in the best sense of the word, looking for the well-being of the polis, the community. And I think we have to keep that in mind. We have to have that subjectivity, whether to some extent it's at a department level and it's factored in, or at our level. So this is about as comfortable as as far as I would go in terms of the numbers, because at some point it does have to come, you know, to our common sense of what's good for the community. And I think there's a open recognition of that. So I'm not sure I've ever seen anything better produced by city staff, you know, since 1998. I'm just really overwhelmed. This is fantastic. This is wonderful. It's a good start for us. And people who want us to be more accountable, I mean, this is where it starts. So I, particularly with the rationale, instead of just being presented with a list of things, a rationale of why this is important and how it's important, and then how it fits into the broader scheme. So like I say, I just can't say enough good about this. Thank you.
Be honest, it was the flow charts that put you over the edge.
That brings back memories of analytical chemistry. No, really.
Mr. Mayor, is it still Engineers Recognition Week or something?
Keep it going.
We missed it by 1
Do a
week,
month. Why
Alderman
not?
Janser. Alderman Straight, did you have a question from earlier?
Mr. Mayor, thanks. Lance, how far out are we given advance notice from like DOT of what's on the horizon for state funds coming down the pike for 1, 3, 5-year projects? I've always been curious for myself and the general public because the criticism that we hear is, you guys knew this was coming, why couldn't you educate people on the flow of traffic in town? And so can you explain that a little bit to me?
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Mayor and Alderman Straight. The DOT uses what they call a 5-year STIP. I'll mess up the letters, so we'll just call it STIP. But basically, that's the programming document that we work with them on. So they will solicit projects from us, the city, for a particular period of years. So I believe last year was for the year 2023. And so typically what we'll do, we'll get a breakdown from the DOT as far as how much or how many dollars we have in our account. We have an urban roads account. You've heard me reference that program in the past. And so on typically the city gets about $2 million a year in that program. When we fund 31st Avenue here in 2020, that project will actually go in the hole a little bit. DOT will advance fund us, and then as the year goes on, we'll build that account back up. So by about 2023 or 24, we should have enough dollars in that account again to start looking at a project. So between now and then, what we do as staff is we look at, okay, where are the growth areas within the city that we've identified? Where are some of the major traffic generators coming from? Do we have any corridors that need some capacity or reconstructions? Like right now, we're looking at 3rd Street pretty hard because the condition of the pavement, the utilities, and there is an opportunity there for some grant funds that we can apply for. So over the next year or so, we'll be analyzing that to see what kind of project we want to push forward. If we have a good project there, we can request funding through the DOT. And of course, that always comes through you first. We ask that we go and approve these projects to be submitted, and then if the DOT puts us in the program, if it fits within all the other cities that apply for it, like Fargo and Bismarck, we have to get in line and wait for those funds, and then we program that project forward.
Thanks, Lance.
Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. Lance, to echo all of Alderman Papadula's comments, absolutely. Please thank your staff, everybody who is attached to this work. This is, I think, just a pretty monumental step forward in terms of the planning and the transparency and the understanding of how all this stuff gets done and how it ends up in front of us and all of these pieces. To speak a little bit to Alderman Papadula's point in terms of when this kind of steps off the sheet from the numbers and becomes the more intangible discussions about how we prioritize these things. I wanted to at least offer an idea that perhaps should be considered in the scoring, which is sort of, and maybe it was there and maybe I just missed it too, but sort of the adherence or the fit within the larger comprehensive plan. And right now that isn't perfectly clear because we as a council and with the city manager haven't quite taken up the values and the vision and the principles and those types of things. But I see a place once we get that work done for that also to sort of fit into these scoring documents and how well they adhere to that. And so I think, again, back to always improving, I think, maybe there's a way to do that in the future in terms of trying to capture some of those intangible qualities. In terms of the actual plan and the draft that was before us, one, thank you for putting First Avenue North on there. That's a project that I think people in town have sort of thrown their hands up at for maybe decades and decades. At least it's on the spreadsheet now, right? So that's a huge step. There were a couple that I'm not sure if I missed them. Maybe they were there, but the Ann Street Bridge. Obviously, that's something we're studying at the very least in terms of getting a sense of. I don't know if that belongs on one of these sheets or not. And then also the quiet zones downtown. You know, I know we're sort of seem to be taking that on piecemeal and some of these other opportunities that have come up, but just a couple things that jumped out right at me to see if we can get them programmed somewhere, at least in the mix.
Certainly. And Mr. Mayor and Alderman Wolski, to your very first point about the comprehensive plan, it is there, maybe not as bold as you would like, but for instance, in the public works sections, when they evaluate utility installations, you know, they have some criteria in there about does this fit within the comprehensive plan as far as where the city is going to expand next. We do that as well on a transportation level, but we have to also balance that with you know, what we have. Like for instance, we know that within the next 6 or 7 years, South Broadway, for where we left off, about 19th Avenue all the way south, has to be reconstructed and 6-laned. It's not in the program yet because we haven't identified where we're going to find all those dollars yet. So we look at it not only on new growth areas in the comp plan, but then also what we have to take care of internal.
Further questions for our city engineer? Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. That takes us to number 16, miscellaneous and discussion items. Are there any items, Alderman Padrigula?
Because the time is late, I'm not going to go into this now, but I will ask the city clerk to copy and disseminate an article from a very sobering meeting I went to, and several of us went to last week, about the effect of climate change on the community. And if we're starting to look at the longer perspective, longer range perspective, we need to start looking at this. So I'll ask her to copy it, and I will make those comments and raise that as an issue next time because it is late this evening.
Thank you, Alderman Padrigula. And I would just leave with this. Regarding the situation from earlier, I do appreciate everyone's, especially the council's, decorum. When anybody comes who is extremely impassioned or misguided, whatever the case may be, I myself try to maintain as high a level of professionalism as I can, despite even letting my emotions get a little bit elevated at times. Absolutely, we do remain to have decorum within our council meetings and remain within order to maintain that we as a city continue to offer up everyone the equal opportunity, but also maintain civility. And whether it's knowingly misstating information or coming to grandstand, it will not be tolerated. There is a latitude that is given, but we will maintain order within our meetings for the good purpose of this city and for the respect of this city.
Mr. Mayor,
Wolski.
I just want to applaud you on the way you conducted yourself tonight. I wouldn't have done nearly as well. So thank you very much.
Any further items before us this evening? Alderman Janser.
Move we adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Janser, second by Alderman Pittner. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.